You step into the hush of an early mountain evening, the kind that settles over the Rockies like a thick wool blanket someone's been mending for years. The air is sharp enough to nip your nose, and every breath feels like a tiny polite slap from nature, reminding you who's really in charge out here. The sky is a dim watercolor wash, fading from bruised purple to ash grey, and beneath it stands the cabin, your cabin for tonight. Weathered logs, moss, stitched along the seams, a thin curl of smoke rising like the mountain's version of a welcome sign. You can already tell you probably won't make it through this day. Not dramatically, just realistically. The 1800s mountain frontier is a place where socks freeze if you look away too long, and your water barrel judges you by turning into a solid block of ice by breakfast. But don't worry. You're here in the safest way possible. As a drifting, invisible observer, with no risk of frostbite, food poisoning, or overly friendly bears. Before we settle in, let me gently remind you, if you want more cozy history journeys like this, feel free to like and subscribe. It helps keep this little cabin warm, metaphorically. And, if you'd like, comment your location and the local time below. People always love seeing who else is awake at odd hours, trying not to think about tomorrow's responsibilities. Now, let's ease into tonight's journey. You push the cabin door open. It groans like someone woken from a nap they didn't authorize. The inside is dim, lit by a single candle perched on a three-legged stool that's doing its very best to stay upright. The smell hits you first: pine smoke, old wool, something baking in a cast-iron pan, and that strange but comforting scent of packed dirt floors. The hearth is the heart of this small world, flames flickering with that stubborn determination only frontier fires seem to have. This room, just one room, really holds almost everything. A straw-stuffed mattress in the corner. A roughly built table with mismatched chairs. A shelf that politely pretends it isn't about to collapse. A rack of drying herbs that occasionally drop tiny bits onto the floor, as if blessing the cabin with frontier confetti. The major historical fact here, something quietly sitting in the background, is that cabins like this often took only a few days to build. Settlers would notch logs with simple tools, drag them into place, and secure them with mud, moss, and sheer willpower. The walls were thick, not because of insulation science, but because thinner ones would simply let the winter win. And, as you stand in the cabin's warm glow, you notice something unusual hanging beside the hearth. A dried, braided rope of onions, dangling like a proud, lumpy trophy. This is your obscure cultural tidbit for the night. Many mountain settlers hung onions indoors, not only because they stored well, but because they believed onions kept sickness from wandering in. Whether it worked is up for debate, but it certainly made the place smell like a stew someone forgot to finish. You run your hand along the wooden table. It's smooth in some areas, splintering in others, a kind of accidental topographical map. A few tin cups rest on it, and beside them lies a wooden spoon carved with surprisingly delicate patterns. The person who made it clearly had either artistic skill or a lot of long winter evenings to fill. Outside, a gust of wind slips through the gaps between the logs, brushing your ankle like a cold cat. You instinctively shift closer to the fire. This was the constant dance of frontier life, trying to keep the outside out and the inside in. And despite the thick logs and chinking, winter always finds its loopholes. Historians still debate whether settlers in these remote mountain cabins truly preferred isolation, or simply tolerated it, because the landscape left them no choice. You imagine a person living here, waking up before sunrise, gathering firewood, melting snow for water, checking traps, repairing things that probably broke just for attention. You kneel near the hearth, listening to the fire hiss softly. It was common for settlers to burn pitch-rich pine because it caught quickly and burned hot, ideal fuel when the temperature outside could drop low enough to freeze freshly boiled water in minutes. You picture yourself waking in the middle of the night to feed this fire, because letting it die meant letting the frost creep toward you with quiet ambition. The floor creaks behind you. You turn slowly, sleepily, and your attention drifts to the little window. Frost feathers bloom across it, catching candlelight in a way that makes the room seem even smaller, cozier, like you're inside a snow globe someone shook too hard. Remember that street you walked past earlier on the way to the cabin? Well, street is generous. It was more of a narrow, trampled path edged by wind-bent pines. You'll pass it again later, but for now, the world ends at this door. This fire, this fragile little bubble of warmth, A kettle hangs from a soot-blackened hook above the fire. Something inside simmers softly, likely weak coffee or the thinnest broth you've ever encountered. Frontier beverages often walked a fine line between comforting and emotional support water. A small wooden box sits under the bed. Curiosity pulls you toward it. Inside are a few folded papers, a sewing needle wrapped with thread, and a tiny, well-worn book, a pocket almanac. Settlers relied heavily on these. They were half calendar, half guidebook, half questionable weather prediction device. You flip it open to find notes scribbled in cramped handwriting. The words mention firewood measurements, the best days for hunting, and a reminder to check chimney for birds again. That's a frontier problem you don't see on modern to-do lists. You sit down on the edge of the straw mattress. It rustles loudly, like it's trying to introduce itself. The mattress is covered by a quilt made from old fabric scraps, faded blues, browns, and the occasional red patch that looks like it was once someone's favorite shirt. Quilts were often family projects, sewn during long winter evenings when daylight was too precious to waste. Each piece had a story, but the quilt keeps them to itself. Your breath slows. The crackling of the fire becomes a gentle metronome. Somewhere outside, snow begins to fall, soft little flecks landing on frozen ground with the quiet confidence of things that don't need to be loud to be heard. You lean back and let the warmth seep into your bones. This cabin, crude as it is, was survival. It was stubbornness turned into architecture. It was the line between life and winter's steady persistence. And as the candle flickers, steady but tired, you feel yourself slipping into the rhythm of frontier time, slower, heavier, shaped by the cycles of the land, rather than the glow of screens or the buzz of notifications. You settle deeper into the quiet. You wake, or rather float, into the next moment of this long, winter-bound evening, still seated near the fire as it crackles in that polite, hard-working way frontier fires do. The warmth wraps around your shoulders like a heavy quilt, and for a brief, sleepy second, you almost forget the snowstorm outside. Almost. A soft thump sounds against the outer wall. Not alarming, just the wind nudging the cabin as if testing its patience. You glance toward the door. Old hinges. Old wood. Old iron latch that probably has opinions stronger than yours. In the 1800s mountains, doors weren't just doors. They were negotiations with nature, wooden shields, standing between you and the entire outside world that would very much like to move in rent-free. You shift your eyes back to the hearth. The flames wobble like dancers who haven't slept enough, casting orange ripples across the cabin's rough walls. Above the fire, the iron hook holding the kettle creaks gently, as though making small talk. Now comes your first subtle callback. Remember the crack in the wall you felt earlier, brushing your ankle with a cold draft? It's still there, doing its best impression of an uninvited guest. A tiny stream of cold air snakes across the floor, determined to remind you that winter demands attention. Settlers handled this constant cold leak with whatever they had. Fabric scraps, moss, animal fat, or dried mud. This is tonight's major historical fact. Many 1800s mountain families weatherproofed their cabins by laboriously stuffing those gaps with homemade chinking every few weeks, because the material shrank, cracked, or got pulled out by overly ambitious mice. And yes, mice were very much part of the frontier experience. Even today, they probably still remember those cabins fondly like old college dorms. Your eyes wander to a wooden peg near the door where a heavy coat hangs wool, thick, slightly misshapen from years of work. Wool was the frontier's best friend. Heavy, scratchy, and steadfastly warm, even when wet. You run your fingers along it, feeling the roughness. It smells faintly of smoke and pine sap, which is basically the 1800s version of masculine outdoorsy scent. The wind rumbles again, and a few tiny grains of snow slip through the windowsill and land on the table. They melt instantly, little reminders that the world outside is both persistent and freezing. You can hear it now, the gentle hiss of snow against the cabin's log walls, a sound so soft that it almost feels like the mountain trying to shush itself. A pot of dried beans rests on a nearby shelf, waiting for tomorrow's slow simmering. Beans were the frontiers. We eat these because they won't betray us. Food cheap, filling, and stubbornly shelf-stable. This leads us to tonight's obscure cultural tidbit. Some settlers believed that soaking beans overnight improved not only their flavor, but their character, as if legumes underwent spiritual development while sitting in a wooden bowl. Historians aren't entirely sure whether this was superstition or just a polite way to justify long cooking times. You move closer to the window. Frost thickens across the glass, curling in delicate star-shaped patterns. You place your hand against the pane. The cold presses back through the thin barrier with steady confidence. Tonight's uncertainty sentence slips naturally into your mind. Historians still debate whether mountain families actually enjoyed these long winter nights for their quiet solitude, or if they simply pretended to enjoy them because complaining wouldn't thaw the snow any faster. The candle on the stool flickers again, longer this time. Wax pools at its base, forming a misshapen disk like a tiny frozen lake. Its light reveals another detail: a bundle of sagebrush tied with simple thread near the rafters. Not for cooking though, technically. Edible, if you're feeling brave. This cabin's builder likely hung it there as a cleansing charm or as a natural insect repellent. Frontier life blurred the line between superstition and practicality, in ways modern life rarely does. You return to the fire, stretching your hands toward the heat. The flames crack, shift, and then collapse into a glowing bed of embers that settle like contented animals preparing for sleep. You pick up the fire poker, a simple iron rod with a curved end, and nudge the logs together. Sparks leap upward like startled fireflies. This motion, this tiny chore, links you directly with the rhythm of frontier life. Fires weren't just nice, they were survival. Every household member learned the art of tending flames. Stacking logs for airflow, rotating half-spent pieces, adding kindling at just the right moment. A poorly tended fire was less a mistake and more a mild tragedy. You lean closer, listening. The logs whisper tiny sighs as they burn. You'd almost think they're telling you their travel stories. Once tall, once alive, once part of the forest you walk through to reach this cabin. Your eyes drift again to the almanac you found earlier. You open it to another page. Small, faded handwriting notes. Snow deep past the creek. Woodline near ridge broken. Sounds by chimney check in morning. That last note makes you smile. Another callback. Earlier someone had mentioned birds in the chimney. Settlers often found small animals nesting there for warmth. Birds, squirrels, occasionally something more ambitious. It was the 1800s version of unexpected attic roommate. Another gust hits the cabin. The walls shiver. The logs creak. It sounds almost like the building is politely clearing its throat. You wrap the quilt around your shoulders. The patchwork weight of it settles over you like a memory someone stitched by hand. Each square, each frayed edge, feels like a tiny piece of story: someone's shirt, someone's apron, someone's child's blanket. The quilt hums its warmth into your body with slow determination. Outside, the snowstorm strengthens. You hear it tapping the roof, steady, rhythmic, like fingers drumming lightly on a drum. Not frantic, not dangerous, just present, persistent, bound to stay. The kettle over the fire begins a slow, soft simmer. You stand and pour a little into a tin cup. The steam curls upward, brushing your face with that faintly roasted scent of frontier coffee. A brew that usually tasted like burnt optimism but did its job. You take a sip. It's hot, very hot, but comforting. You imagine someone sitting here decades ago, doing exactly what you're doing now, cradling this same cup perhaps, warming their hands after a long day of hauling water or chopping endless cords of wood. You breathe in deeper, letting the heat steady you. The storm rumbles. The candle sinks lower. The room grows softer, warmer, quieter. Tonight, you aren't just watching history. You're resting inside it. The storm deepens overnight, though night here in the mountains feels less like a time of day and more like a personality, quiet, brooding, and occasionally dramatic when it wants attention. You sit by the fire, listening as the wind pushes powdered snow against the cabin walls. Even inside, you can feel the world tightening into its winter shell. The air carries that chilly clarity that makes every sound sharper, every breath visible. You rise slowly, stretching your legs. The wooden floor answers with a series of groans that feel more like commentary than structural concern. Frontier cabins always seem to communicate their feelings, usually, "I'm cold," "I'm tired," or "I wasn't built for this." And you, moving around with careful footsteps. Do your best not to disturb its delicate mood. The fire has settled into a deep bed of coals glowing red and orange, steady as a heartbeat. You take the poker and gently prod the fire, embers, listening to them crackle like distant static. This is your first task of the morning, even though no one actually assigned it to you. In cabins like this, tending the fire was the first act of the day. Without it, everything else fell apart. Water froze, bread hardened, fingers went numb, optimism plummeted. A log beside the hearth has already been split, waiting. You lift it, place it carefully onto the coals, and watch as flames begin nibbling along its edge. They grow slowly, stretching, curling, shifting from ember glow to full fire. It's mesmerizing, hypnotic. The kind of sight that makes your thoughts soften into fog around the edges. Here's your major historical fact for this section. Settlers often kept at least a week's worth of firewood stacked indoors during winter, under beds, in corners, even in the loft, because going outside in a blizzard to chop more wood was considered both dangerous and profoundly unnecessary. Firewood inside was not clutter. It was life insurance. You glance toward the window. Frost coats nearly the entire pane now, except for a tiny spot where condensation melted a little circle earlier. The outside world is a blur of quiet white. Trees sway in stiff arcs, and snowdrifts climb higher than you remember them being an hour ago. The storm is determined, but the cabin holds firm. The table stands in the center of the room like a stubborn landmark. On it, last night's tin cup sits half full, a thin line of steam still rising from the cooling liquid. The spoon beside it glints faintly in the firelight. You pick it up, turning it over in your fingers again. The carved patterns catch your attention. Little swirls, dots, and looping lines that almost resemble the branching patterns of frost. Whoever carved it must have been very patient, or very bored, or perhaps both. Near the shelf, a wooden bucket sits beneath a hanging cloth. Inside it is melted snow. Last night's effort to gather water without trekking to a WH, frozen creek. Snow to water math is always disappointing. An entire bucket of snow melts down to what feels like 3 tablespoons of water. This leads directly into your obscure cultural tidbit. Some settlers believed the first snowfall of the year produced cleaner drinking water than later snowfalls, which they thought tasted dusty or old. Whether it was true, or whether the snow simply tapped into their personal grievances, remains a mystery. As you dip a hand into the bucket, the meltwater is painfully cold, the kind of cold that makes your fingers reconsider their life choices. You pull back quickly and wrap your hands in a scrap of cloth. Historians still debate whether cabin floors being made of packed dirt was an intentional choice for insulation, or simply a result of settlers having bigger priorities than finishing their homes. Either way, the ground beneath your feet feels firm and faintly cool, a constant reminder that the mountain is underneath. Everything here. The cabin, the fire, the quilts, your thoughts. You pace slowly around the room. Above the door, a small piece of dried pine branch hangs on a strip of leather. Not decoration, a charm, a whisper of old folklore brought west by people who needed every ounce of luck they could get. Superstitions traveled alongside settlers like uninvited but welcome passengers. You lift the latch and push the cabin door open, just a little. Cold air rushes in immediately, bold and unapologetic. Snow whips through the crack, landing on your eyelashes. Beyond the door, the world is blanketed in a thick, shimmering layer. The trees are white-draped pillars. The path you walked earlier is completely buried. It looks like the forest has quietly decided to erase it. You close the door quickly, tucking the latch back into place. The cabin adjusts to the return of warmth, wood creaking like an old friend stretching under blankets. You notice the animal tracks near the door. Just a few, faint paw prints in the snow before they vanished under new layers. Probably a small fox or a mountain hare. Animals always checked in on cabins, drawn to the warmth, or simply curious about the strange wooden boxes humans built in the wilderness. You imagine a creature stopping outside last night, sniffing the doorframe, tilting its head at the flicker of firelight. The quilt you wrapped around your shoulders earlier slips slightly, and you pull it tighter again. The fabric is warm now, softened by your own body heat. This worn piece of patchwork has become your quiet companion, warming your back, diffusing the chill, reminding you that even in the harshest places, humans always insisted on comfort where they could find it. A soft rattle sounds from the rafters. You look up. For a moment, you wonder if there really is something in the chimney. A bird? A squirrel? A creature meeting its landlord obligations? You laugh under your breath quietly. The cabin seems to enjoy the sound, or at least tolerate it. You return to the fire, settling on the three-legged stool, the one bravely pretending it is not one wobble away from collapse. As you sit, the stool steadies under your weight, determined to fulfill its purpose. The kettle begins to whisper again, tiny bubbling sounds that fill the room with warmth, even if they don't raise the cabin's temperature a single degree. You pour yourself another cup of the bitter frontier brew. It tastes slightly like hope and slightly like disappointment, which was the standard mountain flavor profile in the 1800s. The storm continues, its winter aria outside steady, powerful, yet oddly soothing. The wind sighs. The cabin answers with soft groans. The fire crackles. Everything feels slow and cyclical, like the mountain itself has invited you into one of its long, patient breaths. You let yourself sink further into that rhythm. The cold stays outside, the warmth stays in. And for now, you simply exist in the quiet space between morning, if you can call it that, arrives not with sunlight but with a slight thinning of the darkness. The storm outside softens into a quieter hush, the kind that suggests the mountains are finally taking a breath after a long night of grumbling. You stretch under the quilt, feeling the stiffness in your limbs, as though the cold seeped into your muscles just enough to make them politely complain. The fire has dropped to a faint glow. A single ember pulses near the center like a sleepy heartbeat. You shuffle over and kneel beside the hearth, coaxing the embers gently with the poker. They flare with faint orange stubbornness. A sprinkle of kindling, a careful breath, and suddenly a small flame curls upward like a cat arching its back in slow approval. The log you add next catches quickly, cracking in uneven rhythms. This little ritual is your anchor, your quiet entry into the cabin's morning, and it reminds you of tonight's historical fact. Many settlers used banked fires, covering embers with ashes overnight to preserve just enough heat until morning. Matches were expensive, unreliable, and sometimes downright sulky, so keeping embers alive was a necessity. A cold hearth was more than an inconvenience, it was an accusation. You stand and stretch again. The cabin is still dim, but lighter now. Frost on the window begins to thaw in watery streaks, revealing hints of the winter landscape outside. Snow blankets everything. The world is a single soft shape. Your feet brush against the dirt floor, a sensation cool, textured, grounding. There's a small pile of dried herbs scattered beneath the hanging bundles above you. A few sprigs must have fallen during the night. You kneel and gather them carefully, pressed between fingers that have slowly accepted the mountain's chill as part of the environment. You carry them to the wooden table. The carved spoon from last night rests exactly where you left it, a loyal little piece of frontier artistry. You set the herbs beside it and begin arranging them. Not because you need to, but because it feels like something someone living here would have done, tidying, sorting, preparing for the day. A faint sound catches your ear. A creak, a shuffle. The cabin's roof adjusts with a tiny sigh, shedding some of last night's snow. These buildings were living things in their own way, breathing, settling, reminding their inhabitants that they were built from once living trees, shaped by tools and hands and persistence. You move to the door and open it a crack. A rush of cold air swirls inside, bold, dramatic, and entirely disrespectful to your warm cabin atmosphere. You close the door quickly, as if you've caught someone trying to sneak in. The cold remains outside, but its presence lingers in your bones. Yet there's something else outside tracks. Fresh ones. Not the faint fox prints from last night. These are larger, deeper, and closer to the door. A deer, perhaps, or an elk, or something with hooves and questionable timing. Mountain animals often wandered close, drawn by the faint smell of smoke or the curiosity of hearing something unusual inside. It's comforting to know you aren't alone out here. Although that comes with the tiny caveat that some animals in the mountains did not always differentiate between cabin and very warm log pile. You return to the center of the room. The almanac still lies partly open. You turn a page and read a short handwritten note, Snow heavy. Do not travel. Wolves near ridge. This leads you directly into your obscure cultural tidbit. Mountain settlers often wrote warnings or omens in their almanacs, blending practical advice with folklore. One old superstition said that if wolves howled 3 nights in a row, a blizzard was guaranteed. Whether the wolves predicted storms or storms predicted wolves is something historians still debate. You close the almanac and rest your hand on it gently, sensing the weight of the simple lives written between its pages. No dramatic journaling, no poetic descriptions. Just survival notes. Just reminders of what mattered in each season. The kettle over the fire begins to warm again. You pour a little hot water into a cup and mix it with whatever remnants last night's coffee had left behind. The flavor remains consistent, bold, bitter, but somehow reassuring. You warm your hands around the cup, feeling the heat seep up your wrists. A soft knock taps against the wall behind you. Not a visitor, just snow sliding down the roof. You glance upward. The rafters are lined with small bundles, sagebrush, mint, dried roots, a few strings of berries. Frontier families often hung their harvests this way to keep them dry, away from mice, and infused by smoke. The room carries their faint scents, earthy, sweet, resinous. The air feels layered, like breathing in the memories of a dozen past winters. You walk to the corner where the straw mattress rests. The thin beam of light filters in, illuminating the patterns on the quilt, faded reds blooming beside muted blue squares. You lift part of the quilt, noticing how the colors shift in the firelight. This quilt has weathered seasons, perhaps generations. Some families reused old clothing, including scraps from coats, dresses, and baby blankets. Every quilt was a story disguised as warmth. You sit again on the stool, lifting the carved spoon up to eye level. A thin crack runs along its handle, shaped almost like a lightning bolt. You run your thumb gently over it. The spoon feels smooth, worn by countless hands. You wonder who carved it. Someone living here? Someone passing through? Someone waiting out a storm just like you? Your thoughts drift again to the tracks outside. Settlers often place scraps or salt near the cabin's edge to feed deer or lure animals closer for easier hunting. Though this practice varied widely and sparked plenty of quiet disagreements. Some saw it as practical, others as unnecessary or dangerous. Even in the wilderness, humans had debates. The storm fades further. Snow falls now in gentle, occasional flakes instead of the relentless sweep from earlier. You pull the door open again, this time fully. The cold hits you immediately. Yes, but it's cleaner now. Softer. The kind that wakes your senses rather than numbing them. You step just outside, boots sinking into powdery snow. The mountains loom in muted shapes, enormous silhouettes softened by winter fog. The trees stand still, as if holding their breath, waiting for the next shift in weather. You take in a long, slow breath. The air is crisp and sharp and almost sweet. Then you turn back and step inside, gently closing the door behind you. The warmth welcomes you instantly, wrapping itself around your shoulders again. You're becoming part of the rhythm here, the slow negotiation between comfort and cold, between silence and the world pressing in against the walls. The fire glows. The snow settles. And the cabin holds your quiet presence like a small pocket of time carved out from the mountain's patient stillness. The morning settles into a kind of calm that feels almost suspicious, as if the mountains are plotting their next dramatic weather event but haven't sent out the memo yet. You sit near the fire again, letting its warmth soak into your legs. The flames have grown stronger, climbing confidently along the new log you placed earlier. The crackling is steady, almost rhythmic, like a soft percussion line in the cabin's quiet orchestra. Your breath fogs faintly in the colder corners of the room. The cabin is warm near the fire, but honesty requires admitting that the further edges of the room maintain their own microclimate, something between mild fridge and enthusiastic freezer. That's frontier architecture for you, a house with multiple seasons inside it. You wander to the window, reaching out to brush a thin layer of thawed frost from the glass. Outside, the snow has settled into soft drifts. The trees stand stiff and solemn, like tired guards who gave up arguing with winter long ago. Here lies your quiet transition into today's major historical fact. In the 1800s mountains, Settlers often stacked snow against their cabins deliberately, as a form of natural insulation. Yes, snow, the thing they spent all day trying to survive, was also recruited as a reluctant building assistant. Packed snow could reduce drafts and helped stabilize the cabin's temperature. In other words, winter occasionally fought on both sides. Your fingers linger on the cold window pane. The world beyond feels distant, untouched, peaceful in a way that most modern landscapes never manage. Everything outside moves slower. Even sound seems muffled, as if wrapped in cotton. You can't help but notice how the quiet doesn't feel empty. It feels full, like the mountains themselves are breathing around you. Behind you, something drops from the herb bundles above the rafters, a tiny dried flower head, landing softly on the floor. You pick it up, examining its brittle petals, almost translucent. This leads effortlessly into tonight's obscure cultural tidbit. The early mountain settlers sometimes placed dried wildflowers in their bedding or pockets as good luck charms, especially those harvested on the first warm day after winter. Some believed these flowers carried the promise of spring. Others simply liked the smell. Either way, they were carried like little tokens of warmth. You tuck the tiny flower beside the almanac on the table, where it feels strangely at home. The kettle begins its slow warming again, humming faintly. You pour a small amount of hot water into the tin cup, swirling it as you listen to the wind shift outside. The storm has moved on, but in the mountains, that never means the weather is done. It only means it's taking a break. You take a sip of the hot water, barely flavored, but soothing. The warmth trickles down your throat like melted firelight. You close your eyes for a moment. The quiet settles into your ears in layers. Then a sound, very soft, a distant echo. A low, mournful howl floating across the snow. It comes again, a little clearer this time. Wolves. Not close, but close enough to be heard across the frosted valley. Their calls are low, long, and strangely beautiful, not frightening in this moment so much as ancient, like part of the mountain's original soundtrack. Historians still debate whether wolves were truly more active during winter storms, or whether their howls simply traveled further through cold, dense air. Either way, you hear it again stretching through the trees, over the drifts, reaching your cabin walls, as though reminding you that this land has other tenants. You ease away from the window and return to the hearth, sitting on the stool again. Its single wobbly leg behaves today, offering loyalty despite its structural insecurities. As you lean forward to poke the fire, you notice the chimney giving a small rattle. Not alarming, more like something shifting, above. Maybe more wind, maybe an animal, or maybe the cabin is just clearing its throat again. Frontier living required flexibility in interpreting mysterious noises. You add another small log to the flames, watching it steam slightly as trapped winter moisture evaporates. The fire pops in small bursts, sending sparks flicking upward. They vanish quickly into the dimness of the chimney. A soft tapping begins against the wall, steady, rhythmic. You glance up. It's just snow sliding in small chunks from the roof. The storm must have left several inches piled high, and now the cabin is shrugging some of it off with mild annoyance. Each thump echoes through the logs like a sleepy heartbeat. You wrap the quilt around yourself again. The colors shift as it folds over your shoulders. Soft reds, muted greens, worn blues. You trace a few stitches with your thumb. Some are neat and deliberate. Others clearly came from a moment of exhaustion or distraction. Quilts weren't just blankets, they were time capsules of human moods. Your attention drifts toward the door. A faint shadow crosses the light slipping from the window. You turn slowly, listening. Nothing moves. But when you open the door a crack, you see the fresh tracks again, deeper this time. Not threatening, just curious. A deer has wandered closer, leaving a trail of dainty prints leading toward the trees. You watch it for a moment. Its breath rises in small clouds. Frost clings to its fur like tiny stars. It turns its head slightly, ears flicking. Then, with the quiet dignity of something fully comfortable in its environment, it steps away into the white forest. You close the door, letting the warmer air press gently against your back. The cabin feels more alive after those few seconds. You realize how much the outside world influences the mood here, even through thick logs and a determined fire. Returning to the table, you run your hand along the wooden surface. The grain is uneven, rippling in long waves. One knot in the wood looks like the shape of an eye. An unblinking observer, witness to countless meals, repairs, winters, births, storms, heartbreaks, hopes. Frontier tables were the core of the home, used for everything from chopping firewood to schooling children to treating frostbite. The entire cabin seems arranged around it, or perhaps shaped by it. You sit beside the table, holding your tin cup, feeling the fire glow against your skin. The storm has passed. The wolves howl distantly. The cabin adjusts to the shifting quiet, and you, wrapped in the quilt, warmed by the fire, surrounded by the slow breath of the mountains, feel yourself settling deeper into this soft, frozen moment. A moment made of wood and smoke and snow and silence. A moment you could easily fall asleep in. The day stretches forward in a long, pale ribbon of winter light. Not bright, just present, like the sky is politely participating without putting in its full effort. You settle deeper into the cabin, listening to the steady quiet that always follows mountain storms. It's the kind of silence that feels thick, almost tangible, as if you could scoop it up with your hands and hold it. You rise from the stool and walk toward the door again. The quilt slips from your shoulders, falling softly onto the mattress. For a moment, you consider leaving it behind, but the cold nips at your ankles, reminding you of your place in the frozen hierarchy. So you drape it back over you like a cape of drowsy authority. You unlatch the door. The wood groans a familiar complaint by now, and the cold pushes inside immediately, swirling around your legs like a mischievous spirit. You step out anyway, just onto the threshold, boots sinking slightly into snow that has begun to compact from its own weight. The air is crisp enough to make your lungs blink in surprise. The sky is a wash of muted silver. Snow clings to branches in heavy, thick layers like the trees are wearing winter coats, a size too big. You take a slow breath, watching your exhale drift upward. The mountains sit in their usual, ancient silence, watching you with the same indifference they've shown every human who ever attempted to live among them. You step back inside, shutting the door firmly, the latch giving a satisfying clink. The sudden return to warmth feels like stepping into a memory. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the feeling wash over you. Then you turn your attention to the corner where the woodpile sits. Most of the logs are dry, neatly stacked, but a few show signs of old moisture, darkened edges, a slight sagging of bark. You pick one up and examine it. This leads directly into your major historical fact for the section. Settlers often cut and dried firewood months in advance, usually in late summer or early fall. Winter wood wasn't just gathered, it was prepared. Wet wood produced too much smoke, clogged chimneys, and could turn a cozy cabin into a very sad representation of a fog machine. You return to the hearth, placing the driest log near the fire to pre-warm before adding it in. A gentle technique, but effective. The flames react positively, brightening as if grateful. A sudden flutter catches your attention. You turn toward the rafters. Something small, quick, and a little chaotic moves behind the dried herbs. Ah, there it is. A small bird, brown-feathered, round, slightly offended by its own presence, perches on a beam. Somehow it must have squeezed down through the chimney, and now it's looking around with that specific avian expression of, "This is not the forest." You watch it hop, flutter again, and then settle into a disgruntled puff. This gives you tonight's obscure cultural tidbit. Settlers believed that if a bird found its way into the cabin during winter, it meant the storm outside was worse than expected, or that another storm was coming. Birds didn't intentionally seek shelter in homes. They followed warmth or confusion, or both. And sometimes, they simply made bad life decisions. Just like people. You slowly reach for the door and crack it open. Cold air enters. The bird looks directly at you with deep suspicion. You try a gentle wave. The bird blinks. Twice. Then leaps from the beam and after a frantic moment of mid-air rethinking flaps out into the open world. You shut the door, shaking your head slightly. You can almost imagine whoever lived here writing in the almanac, "Bird fell down chimney, another storm coming," or "Bird is stupid." Historians still debate whether frontier humor was naturally dry or simply shaped by the fact that everyone was cold all the time. You return to the table, lowering yourself onto the stool. The stool wobbles again once, dramatically, before settling into position. You place your hands near the fire, watching the shadows stretch across the logs like soft ink. Your gaze drifts toward the almanac. You open it again. A loose paper slips out and floats to the floor. You pick it up, unfolding it carefully. The handwriting is small, cramped, but legible. Snow at ridge, deeper than expected. Trails blocked. Stay by cabin. Wood low. The last two words, wood low, feel heavy. You glance at the woodpile. It's not empty, but it's definitely not overflowing. You feel, just for a moment, the faint echo of the anxiety settlers carried all winter long. They weren't afraid of wolves or mythical dangers. They were afraid of running out of firewood. You take another deep breath, letting the fire's warmth calm your thoughts again. The kettle begins its soft rumble. You pour a bit of hot water into your cup and take a careful sip. It's not fancy, it's not remarkable, but it's comfort. And in the mountains, comfort carries far more weight than flavor. Your attention drifts outward again, through the frost-covered window. The snowfall has slowed to a lazy drift, each flake falling with the confidence of something that knows you have nowhere else to be. You notice the deer tracks again, a clearer trail now that the wind has settled. You imagine the animal stepping softly across the drifts, listening, sniffing, watching for danger. You picture it stopping near the cabin, sensing warmth, seeing faint light through the cracks between the logs, and then continuing on, unhurried. Maybe you're projecting, maybe you're simply sinking deeper into the rhythm of this place. The cabin's walls crackle softly as the fire spreads warmth through the logs. A few small icicles hanging from the window frame begin to drip. The smell of pine smoke thickens, cozy and grounding. You shift your position on the stool, pulling the quilt around your legs now. The soft fabric, worn thin in places, warms instantly. It's a small miracle how cloth, fire, and wood work together here. Humans, nature, and handmade things cooperating in their own quiet ecosystem. A faint hush settles over the room. A lull, a pause, the kind of pause where you could fall asleep sitting up, warmed by firelight, comforted by the steady crackle of burning logs and the lazy drift of snow outside. The cabin feels like it's holding its breath with you, and you let yourself sink just a little deeper into the warmth. The quiet of the late morning sits inside the cabin like an extra guest, calm, unobtrusive, and perfectly content to stay as long as it likes. You stretch your fingers toward the fire again, feeling the gentle heat dance across your palms. The flames have settled into a steady glow, cozy and predictable. Outside, the snowfall slows to a few drifting flakes, falling almost lazily, as if winter has tired itself out. You rise from the stool and walk slowly across the cabin. Each footstep sinks slightly into the packed earth floor. The texture is uneven, cool, grounding, like walking across the gentle memory of the land itself. You pause near the shelf, running your hand over a tin mug, a folded wool cloth, and a stubby candle that looks like it's spent several winters contemplating its purpose. Then your eye drifts toward the door. A thin line of light presses underneath it. Not sunlight, winter light never quite commits to brightness, but enough to draw your curiosity. You walk over and place your ear against the cool wood. Nothing. Just silence. The kind of silence that has lived here far longer than any human could. You unlatch the door and open it slowly. A wave of cold air sweeps past you, brushing your ankles with icy confidence. The snow outside glitters in soft silver patterns. Some drifts are knee-high, others shaped into wind-carved ridges. The forest stands in solemn stillness, branches drooping under the weight of the storm's leftovers. You step just outside, boots crunching into the powder. The sound echoes faintly, swallowed quickly by the mountain. The air is so crisp you can practically hear it. You look around, taking in the serene, frozen expanse. Then you notice something. A thin curl of smoke rising far in the distance, barely visible, but undeniably present. Another cabin, perhaps, or a small homestead. People lived far apart in these mountains, but never so far that their smoke signals couldn't accidentally gossip to one another. This leads us to your major historical fact for the section. Isolated mountain settlers often communicated over long distances using smoke plumes. Not in an elaborate coded way, just simple signals. A thin, steady plume meant all was well. A thick, frantic one meant something was wrong. and no smoke at all for too long meant someone should check in, assuming the weather allowed it. You exhale, watching your breath drift upward like a tiny echo of that distant smoke. For a moment, the two plumes look almost related, yours fading quickly, the other standing steady. A soft rustling to your left catches your attention. You turn. A snow-covered pine branch gently releases a clump of snow onto the ground, creating a soft, muffled thud. It's the mountain's way of shrugging. You step back into the cabin, closing the door behind you. The warmth greets you instantly, curling around your shoulders. The door latch clicks shut with a small, satisfying certainty. You walk toward the wooden table. The almanac still lies there, half open, waiting like a loyal companion. You flip to another page. More handwriting. Today's entry reads, "Snow deep, paths hidden, stay close, wind quiet." You smile slightly. The practical wisdom of someone who lived many winters in this place. They likely wrote these notes not just for themselves, but for their family teachings, disguised as brief reminders. You notice a small wooden container near the table, half buried under a folded cloth. You open it. Inside are dried berries, dark, wrinkled, sweetened only by the memory of sunlight. You take one out and taste it. It's tart and earthy, with a faint hint of something floral. This gives you tonight's obscure, cultural tidbit. Many mountain settlers dried chokecherries, not just for food, but for winter medicine. They believed the berries strengthened the lungs during cold months. Herbal knowledge passed through families like whispered recipes, part science, part tradition, part, "let's hope this helps." You close the container gently and set it back on the table. Near the rafters, the dried herbs rustle faintly as a downdraft from the chimney slips through. The scent of sage mingles with pine smoke. The cabin's air feels like a quiet apothecary, soft, earthy, comforting. You pull the quilt tighter around yourself as you walk toward the window. The frost patterns have softened into melting streams. Water droplets gather at the edges, clinging stubbornly before falling onto the windowsill with tiny plinks. Each drop feels like a little countdown toward the cabin, warming completely. Outside, you notice a new set of tracks larger than the deer's from yesterday. Hooves, deep, prints. Likely, an elk wandering through the quiet morning, searching for food buried under 2 feet of icy stubbornness. The creature's path curves near the cabin, then veers toward the creek bed beyond. You imagine it standing there for a moment, sniffing the air, recognizing the faint aroma of smoke and humans. Elk were cautious, but curious, the mountain version of nosy neighbors. Historians still debate whether settlers viewed large wildlife as part of their daily environment or as unpredictable dangers. Some journals portray elk and moose as calm companions of the landscape. Others describe them as enormous, unpredictable, lawn ornaments with attitude problems. You return to the hearth. The fire crackles as the next log collapses inward, sending a spray of sparks up the chimney. They vanish instantly, leaving the faint smell of resin behind. You kneel to stir the embers slightly, redistributing the glowing coals. Frontier fires demanded regular attention, not out of fear, but out of routine. In these cabins, tending fire was a meditative act, a rhythm the whole day hinged upon. You sit again on the 3-legged stool. It wobbles, in fact. This might be its most dramatic wobble yet, but still manages to balance. It has survived storms, cold mornings, and your shifting weight. A surprisingly resilient piece of furniture. You pat it once in quiet appreciation. The kettle murmurs. You pour yourself another tin cup of hot water, letting the steam rise across your face. The warmth soothes your chilled skin, your fingers, even your chest as you breathe it in. The scent of pine smoke mixes with the herbal air and the faint sharpness of melted frost. It's the smell of a life built with hands, wood, fire, and patience. You lean back slightly, letting your shoulders loosen. Outside, the mountain stands still. Inside, the cabin settles into its peaceful winter rhythm. You're part of that rhythm now. Warm, quiet, present, resting inside the slow, ancient heartbeat of winter in the high country. The quiet continues its slow drift through the cabin as midday settles in. Though calling it midday feels generous when the sun seems committed to hiding behind the clouds like a stage-shy actor. The light that filters through the frosted window is soft, muted, more of a suggestion than a presence. Still, It's enough to gently outline the room in faint silvery glow. You stretch your legs and wander back toward the hearth. The fire has calmed into a solid, glowing bed of ember-orange heat, with small flames licking at the edges of the newest log you placed earlier. The warmth radiates toward you in slow pulses, like soft breaths from a sleeping creature. Beside the fireplace lies the iron trivet holding a pot of yesterday's beans, or rather, yesterday's bean intentions. Since the water-to-bean ratio remains slightly tragic, you lift the lid, releasing a puff of warm, earthy aroma that feels strangely comforting considering the rustic simplicity of the meal. This leads neatly into today's major historical fact. In many 1800s mountain cabins, meals simmered on the hearth for hours. Slow cooking wasn't a trend. It was practical survival, softening dried beans, tough root vegetables, or salted meats that had grown approximately 3 extra personalities during storage. A pot that bubbled all day kept the cabin warm and the food ready whenever hunger and time allowed. You set the lid back down gently. The pot gives a little metallic sigh, like it appreciates the attention. You move toward the window. Frost veils most of the glass, but a few thawed streaks offer glimpses of the world outside. The storm has calmed completely, leaving behind thick blankets of snow that smooth the landscape into quiet curves and rounded mounds. Each tree is a sculpture, each drift a soft hill. The world looks padded, softened, made gentle by winter's insistence. Near the cabin's wall, half buried in snow, lies a stack of split logs, your external woodpile. Only the tops of the logs are visible, pale against the white backdrop. You feel a faint shiver of sympathy for them, sitting out there like forgotten soldiers waiting to be recruited. An idea occurs to you. You pull your coat from its peg near the door, heavy wool, stiff with old smoke, and drape it over your shoulders. The quilt follows, because you respect survival. You unlatch the door and push it open. Cold air sweeps inside with confidence, brushing your cheeks and filling your lungs with sharp clarity. You step outside carefully. The snow gives under your feet, soft and powdery. It's deep enough to swallow your boot halfway. You walk toward the woodpile, breath trailing behind you like a small banner. As you reach the logs, you kneel and brush snow from the tops. Your hand grows cold instantly, even through your glove. This is a perfect transition to tonight's obscure cultural tidbit. Mountain settlers sometimes stored their firewood under upturned animal hides to protect it from snow. The hides acted as a natural tarp, shedding moisture and keeping the logs dry enough to burn. Not glamorous, perhaps, but wildly effective. A rule of frontier life. If something works, it doesn't need to be pretty. You brush one log clean and lift it into your arms. It's heavy, denser than the ones inside, still cold to the core. Carrying firewood was a daily ritual for settlers, often done multiple times a day in winter. It's humbling work, the kind that leaves your arms tingling and makes your breath puff harder in the frigid air. You haul the wood back toward the cabin, boots crunching steadily. The snow sparkles faintly in the dim light, as though the mountains sprinkled a little powdered sugar everywhere for dramatic effect. As you reach the door, you stomp your boots gently to shake off the snow, then duck inside with the log tucked securely under your arm. The warmth greets you immediately, soft, fragrant, familiar. You close the door, latch it, and return the log to the woodpile beside the hearth. You brush snow from your coat and hang it back on the wall. The quilt settles like an old friend around your shoulders. With a deep breath, you return to the table. The almanac lies open to a page you hadn't noticed before. This entry reads, "Sun low, quiet day, snow good for tracking." You smile faintly. The person who lived here was observant, practical, and maybe a bit poetic in their own frontier way. Tracking animals in fresh snow was essential food, safety, awareness. The snow revealed what the forest often hid. You glance once more toward the window. Sure enough, a new trail of small tracks curves near the cabin, little paw prints belonging to something light, quick, and furred. A rabbit, most likely. Its path zigzags between drifts, leaving loops and arcs like the handwriting of a creature who never studied penmanship. You sit back down on the stool. It wobbles, but cooperates. One day, it may give up entirely. Today is not that day. You warm your hands near the fire. The glow bathes your fingers in gentle orange light, making the cabin feel even smaller and more intimate. You listen closely to the world around you. The faint hiss of fire, the soft melting drip of icicles near the window, the tiny creak of logs adjusting. It's all so slow, so peaceful, so undemanding. You take a sip of warm water. The steam carries the faint scent of pine resin, herbs, and last night's coffee residue, a frontier blend if ever there was one. As you sit there, wrapped in warmth, a thought drifts into your mind. What did winter feel like to the people who lived here? Not as an aesthetic, not as a cozy retreat, but as a long season of waiting and necessity. A test of endurance softened by firelight, shared blankets, and the simple rhythm of daily tasks. Historians still debate whether settlers found these months meditative or maddening. Some journals speak of winter as a welcome rest after summer's backbreaking labor. Others describe it as a lonely struggle, where time moved like frozen molasses. You let that uncertainty settle into the quiet with you. The fire pops softly, sending a tiny spark upward. You lean back slightly, closing your eyes for a moment. The warmth, the quiet, the soft glow, it all pulls you toward relaxation like gentle gravity. Outside, the snowy forest keeps its silent watch. Inside, the cabin hums with warmth and the slow exhale of winter. You remain in that delicate balance between cold and comfort, between the old world and the present moment, letting the cabin hold you in its small, timeless embrace. The afternoon drifts in quietly, softening the cabin's shadows and glazing the walls with a mellow, smoky glow. The fire burns steadily, low but confident, its warmth filling the room with a gentle hum. You stretch your shoulders as you stand, noticing how your body has begun to subtly adjust to the cabin's rhythm. Slow breaths, slower thoughts, and movements that seem to match the calm pulse of the mountains. You walk toward the window again. The frost has nearly melted from the center pane, leaving delicate lace-like patterns along the edges. Snow still blankets everything outside, shimmering faintly even without direct sunlight. The forest's silence is deep, layered, ancient, a quiet so complete, it feels almost like a living presence, watching over the valley. The drifts near the cabin have settled into smooth curves, wind-sculpted ridges catching the pale light. A few sets of tracks crisscross the snow, some deep, some light, each telling small stories of wandering animals, going about their frozen routines. You can distinguish the wide prints of an elk path farther off, and closer, a fine chain of rabbit tracks zigzagging with cheerful chaos. You press your fingertips against the glass. It's cold, sharply, unapologetically cold, reminding you that even with the storm gone, winter holds on with a patient grip. You step away from the window and turn toward the hearth. The pot of slowly simmering beans sits there like a dependable friend, bubbling occasionally but never demanding attention. You lift the lid slightly. Steam escapes in a gentle plume, carrying the earthy aroma of long-cooking food. The smell settles warmly into the cabin's air, mixing with pine smoke and faint herbs. This brings you into today's major historical fact. Frontier families often kept a constant simmering pot on the hearth throughout winter, adding ingredients whenever they were available. The dish evolved day by day, sometimes nutritious, sometimes questionable, always warm. It was called a perpetual stew, and some cabins kept theirs going all winter long, stirring in yesterday's leftovers, today's scraps, and tomorrow's hopes for flavor. You replace the lid and step back. That pot feels like a tiny symbol of frontier resilience, no matter what the mountains threw at them. Something warm always waited on the fire. Your eyes drift toward the almanac again, lying open on the table as if eager for attention. You walk over, quilt dragging softly across the floor behind you. The almanac's spine is cracked, its pages worn, but it carries an undeniable sense of purpose. You turn to the next entry. Tracks near creek, snow deep at ridge, weather holding, short sentences, practical observations. The writer seems calm, measured, the kind of person who met winter with quiet acceptance rather than complaint. You find that perspective settling into your own mood too. The mountains ask for patience, and you're learning to borrow theirs. A faint thump overhead draws your attention. You glance up. Snow is sliding gently from the roof again, landing in soft piles outside. The sound is strangely comforting, like the cabin sighing after holding so much weight through the night. As you listen, something else catches your ear. A faint knocking from the far corner of the room. Not sharp, not alarming. Just a tiny, intermittent tap. You walk over, curious. The sound seems to come from the wall itself. You place your hand against the log surface. The tapping repeats, then stops, then starts again, slower this time. Ah, you recognize it now. A woodpecker likely tapping somewhere just outside, testing the logs for tasty insects winter forgot to hide properly. And that brings you into tonight's obscure cultural tidbit. Settlers often believed that woodpeckers knocking on a cabin in winter were weather messengers. A rapid series of knocks supposedly meant a storm was coming. Slower taps meant the weather would stay calm. Whether this was scientific, wishful thinking, or simply bored observation, historians still debate. You smile faintly, listening to the steady rhythm of the bird deciding whether your cabin qualifies as a restaurant. Returning to the fire, you shift the logs slightly, coaxing more flame out of the embers. The wood crackles in soft bursts, sparks flicking upward. You can feel the radiant heat on your face, warm, gentle, grounding. A faint heaviness tugs at your eyelids. The warmth, the quiet, the rhythm of the fire, they all conspire to soften your thoughts. You lean back against the wooden post beside the hearth, feeling its solid weight behind you. The cabin has begun to feel familiar, not just a structure, but a presence. A quiet companion made of logs, smoke, and patience. You pull the quilt tighter around your shoulders. Its patchwork colors glow warm in the firelight, faded blues, mellow browns, worn red patches shaped by countless hands. Each stitch, each square, the frayed edge carries a human story you'll never fully know, but can feel all the same. Outside, the rabbit tracks near the window have deepened. Perhaps the animal passed by again. The thought brings a small sense of companionship. You and a small, skittish creature, quietly sharing the same winter. The kettle begins to hum again, in that soft, persistent way it does when it's nearly ready. You pour a little hot water into your tin cup, lifting it toward your face. The steam curls upward, brushing your cheeks, warming your nose. You breathe it in deeply. The scent is faintly bitter, faintly woody, faintly herbal. A frontier blend of comfort and compromise. A log outside shifts under the weight of melting snow, creating a soft crunch. Then, all is quiet again. The silence inside the cabin settles deeper, thicker. It feels like the walls themselves are resting. The world has shrunk to this warm bubble of fire and shadows and familiar textures. You sit, resting the cup in your hands, letting the warmth seep into your palms. Your breathing slows naturally. Your thoughts soften. The mountain afternoon stretches long, wide, and incredibly gentle. Historians still debate whether settlers experienced time differently in winter, whether days felt longer because of the cold, or shorter because of the constant work of survival. All you know is that this moment feels suspended, peaceful, an entire plateau of stillness in the middle of the wide frontier. You close your eyes, just for a second. The fire cracks, the cabin sighs, the mountains breathe, and you feel yourself ease into the soft, patient heartbeat of winter once again. The light outside shifts again, growing dimmer in that slow, unhurried way winter afternoons tend to fade. The brightness never truly arrived today, but now it slips away entirely, leaving the world wrapped in a pale grey quiet. The cabin responds to the changing light almost imperceptibly, its shadows lengthening, its warmth becoming more noticeable, its wooden walls settling into their evening creaks. You stand and stretch, feeling the pull of muscles that have spent most of the day resting near the fire. The air carries that faint scent of pine smoke clinging to everything. Now your coat, the quilt, even your hair. There's comfort in this shared aroma, like the cabin is slowly adopting you as one of its belongings. You walk toward the door and rest your ear lightly against the thick wood. For a moment, everything is still. Then, far off, soft, distant, almost dreamy, you hear it. The slow bending groan of snow shifting on a high mountain slope. Not dangerous, just present. A reminder that the landscape is always moving, even when it seems carved in stone. You open the door a crack. The cold rushes in immediately. It has excellent manners like that and brushes your cheeks. The snow outside glows faintly in the last grey light. Each drift smooth and untouched except for a few animal tracks crossing the distance. You notice a pattern you hadn't seen before, small paw prints circling near the woodpile. likely a curious fox investigating the area under cover of snowfall. You step outside for just a moment. The cold steals your breath, but there's beauty in it, a beauty that demands respect. The mountains tower in their muted twilight, edges softened, peaks dusky and quiet. You breathe in the cold, feeling it slide through your chest, sharp and clean. This leads you into today's major historical fact. Winter, twilight, in high mountain cabins, was often the busiest moment of the day, not because of chores, but because it was the time settlers checked their surroundings for tracks. These snowy messages revealed what creatures had wandered by, which predators were nearby, or whether any visitors, two-legged or four, had approached the property. You step back inside, closing the door firmly. The warmth gathers around you again, wrapping your body with the familiarity of a well-worn blanket. You slip the quilt across your shoulders and return to the hearth. The fire needs a bit of tending, so you kneel and use the poker to move the half-burnt logs inward. Sparks leap upward in tiny fireworks, fading instantly as they rise. You add another log, listening to the satisfying thump as it settles into place. The kettle sits on its hook, exhaling soft plumes of steam. You pour hot water into your tin cup, letting the heat warm your fingers. The cabin smells faintly herbal again, some combination of sage, mint, and pine that lives in the rafters and travels down whenever the fire stirs the air. Something nudges your attention, a faint scratch at the far wall. Subtle, rhythmic. You walk over to investigate. Pressing your ear to the logs, you hear it clearly, a faint nibbling. Likely a small mouse tunneling through the outer snowbank or testing the cabin wall for structural weaknesses. This brings you to your obscure cultural tidbit. Settlers often place small bits of mint or pennyroyal near the walls to deter mice, believing the strong scent disrupted their sense of direction. Whether this was genuine vermin science or just minty optimism, historians still debate. You stand again, brushing dust from your hands, and return to the table. The almanac sits open as always, patient and well-worn. You flip to a new page. The entry reads, "Fox near pile. Tracks fresh. Snow light but cold." You smile at the mention of the fox. The writer's quiet observations feel like old company now, steady, unadorned, honest. You set the almanac down and move toward the small wooden cupboard built into the wall. Inside are a few simple items. A small sack of flour, a tin of salt, a bundle of dried juniper berries, and an old metal cup used as a measuring scoop. You run your fingers along the wooden shelf. Its surface is rough, worn smooth in places by years of hands reaching for necessary ingredients. This cupboard hums with history, not important history, not dramatic history, but the history of daily life, which is often far more revealing. It carries the quiet knowledge of people who lived with the seasons rather than against them. You look toward the window again. Dusk deepens, shadows thicken. A soft purple haze fills the sky outside, turning every tree into a silhouette. The mountains blur into dark, massive shapes, barely distinguishable from the sky. You settle onto the stool once more, careful of its signature wobble. Its creaking seems louder in the near dusk, a small reminder that even furniture ages with personality. The fire glows brighter now in the dimming cabin. Its orange and gold hues flicker across the walls, turning the interior into a soft, moving painting, warm tones, deep shadows, the gentle shimmer of light on old wood. The warmth makes your eyelids heavy. It's that specific kind of tiredness that comes not from exhaustion, but from comfort. The feeling of being wrapped in safety, quiet, and stillness. The kettle burbles softly behind you, filling the cabin with a steady background hum. Outside, you hear only the faint sighs of wind drifting down the slopes. The forest, once loud with storms and shifting snow, quiets itself into a calm evening breath. You sip your warm drink again. The heat spreads through your chest slowly, like a candle melting inside. For a moment, you imagine what it would have felt like for the people who lived here, sitting in this very spot, wrapped in winter layers, listening to the same sounds, watching the same slow fade of day into night. They may have been thinking about chores or food or hope or fear. Or maybe, on rare occasions, they were thinking of nothing at all, simply letting the cabin's warmth cradle them. Historians still debate whether mountain solitude was liberating or overwhelming. Some people thrived in the silence. Others struggled with its weight. You feel it settling over you now, soft, steady, peaceful. Maybe it depends not on the mountain, but on the moment. The fire snaps softly. The kettle murmurs. The mountains fade into night. And you rest there in the warm glow, wrapped in quiet, wrapped in time, wrapped in the gentle patience of winter. Evening begins to settle across the mountains, with a softness that feels almost intentional, as if winter is carefully lowering a blanket over the world. Inside the cabin, the fire becomes the dominant source of light, throwing warm, flickering patterns along the log walls. Shadows stretch, bend, and sway gently in the orange glow, like slow dancers warming up for the night. You adjust the quilt around your shoulders and stand, taking in the room that now feels smaller, cozier, more intimate beneath the deepening dusk. The cabin hums with warmth, the kind that fills the air, settles in your clothes, and sinks low into your bones. Outside, the snow reflects what faint twilight remains, glowing dimly like the last embers of a dying lantern. You walk toward the window. Frost creeps along the edges of the glass again, growing in delicate, branching patterns that resemble tiny forests of ice. Beyond the window, darkness gathers, consuming the valley in a slow gradient. The silhouettes of trees blur into one another as night overtakes them. A single star glimmers faintly above the ridge, one point of light in a sea of growing shadow. You press your fingers lightly against the cold glass. The contrast between your warmth and the mountain's chill pulses through your fingertips, reminding you exactly where you are, deep in winter, deep in solitude, deep in the heart of a world that doesn't hurry for anyone. You step away from the window and move toward the hearth. The fire is strong now, fed earlier by your careful tending. Flames flicker upward, casting bright curls of light. You kneel, adding a new log, listening to the way it thumps into place and begins steaming slightly as it warms. This leads you smoothly into today's major historical fact. Settlers relied on specific types of wood for nighttime fires, often choosing dense, long-burning hardwoods like oak or hickory when available. These overnight logs could smolder for hours, allowing families to sleep without needing to constantly stoke the fire. In high mountain regions where hardwoods were scarcer, settlers sometimes used thick pine knots, instead dense chunks rich with resin that burned longer than regular logs. You lean back as the flames catch, crackling with slow confidence. A sound drifts in from outside a distant hoot. An owl, somewhere beyond the ridge, announcing the arrival of night. Its call echoes softly through the trees, muted by snow, yet unmistakable. The sound is ancient, calming in a way that's hard to explain, like a voice from the mountain itself. Inside the cabin, the owl's call feels like it belongs another piece of the winter symphony that surrounds this little shelter. You settle back onto the stool, careful of its loyal wobble. The warmth from the fire touches your face, comforting and steady. You take a slow breath, feeling the scent of pine smoke, warm wool, and simmering stew mingle in the air. Your eyes drift toward the almanac again. You pick it up gently and flip to another entry. Tonight's page is short. Stars clear, cold rising. Keep fire banked. Simple, direct, helpful. The kind of note meant to save someone's fingertips from freezing off during a midnight trip outside. You set the book down, letting your hand rest on its worn cover. Then a faint rustle from the rafters draws your attention. You look up and spot a tiny shape dangling from one of the herb bundles. A dried sprig of lavender has fallen loose, drifting down like a fragile snowflake. You catch it before it hits the ground. This gives you tonight's obscure cultural tidbit. Some mountain settlers placed dried lavender or yarrow under their pillows, believing it protected them from nightmares or restless spirits. Whether this worked or was simply early aromatherapy, historians still debate, but many journals mention the practice fondly. You bring the lavender sprig close. Its scent is faint now, but still soothing, carrying echoes of warmer seasons long past. You set it gently beside the almanac. The kettle hums on the hearth, reminding you of its gentle duties. You pour a little hot water into your tin cup, watching the steam rise in slow spirals. The warmth of the cup seeps into your cold palms, grounding you in the present moment. Outside, another sound emerges, a soft crunch of snow. You turn toward the door instinctively. Not a threatening sound, more like the careful step of something exploring. You listen. Another crunch, then silence. You walk to the door and stand quietly. The night presses against the wood. The cold radiates through it. You consider opening it. Just a crack, but decide against it. Night is a different world in the mountains, beautiful, but not always inviting. Still, you picture what might. To be out there. Perhaps a fox again, sniffing for food near the woodpile. Or a deer passing by, pausing to listen to the crackle of your fire. Animals often showed curiosity toward human dwellings in winter. Not out of threat, but out of shared survival instincts. You step away from the door slowly and return to the glow of the fire. The shadows dance more freely now, moving with the shifting flames. You watch them rise and fall, flicker and stretch, their shapes transforming like sleepy thoughts drifting between dreams. The quilt around your shoulders warms pleasantly, carrying the faint scent of smoke and old fabric. Its gentle weight feels like someone placing a hand on your back, steady, reassuring. You settle deeper into the stool, letting your body relax into the fire's glow. The room feels smaller now, but in a comforting way, like the cabin is embracing the night along with you. Historians still debate whether frontier families feared the darkness or found solace in it. Some diaries hint at deep unease, especially when alone. Others describe winter nights as moments of peace, reflection, or even quiet joy. Perhaps the truth lies between fear softened by firelight, solitude eased by routine, silence warmed by small comforts. The kettle hisses softly, the fire crackles, the mountains breathe beneath the stars, and you, wrapped in quilt and quiet, let the night settle gently around you. Night deepens around the cabin, settling in slow, velvety layers that wrap the mountain valley in darkness. Inside, the fire becomes the entire heart of the world. Its glow warm and alive, flickering against the log walls in long ripples of amber light. Every movement of the flame feels amplified in the stillness, each crackle echoing faintly through the quiet air. You pull the quilt a little tighter and stand, stretching your arms toward the glowing warmth. The heat feels richer now, almost tangible, as if the fire itself is leaning forward to meet you. The scent of pine resin and smoke mixes with the faint herbal notes drifting from the rafters. The cabin breathes softly, wood expanding and contracting with tiny creaks. You take a slow step toward the window. Night outside is absolute deep blue-black, thick, quiet, and almost heavy. The only light comes from the faint glitter of snow, reflecting the fire's glow from inside the cabin. Your own reflection stares back at you, blurred by frost and shadow. You place your palm against the glass. It's cold enough to bite, not dangerously so, but enough to remind you that just a few inches of wood and clay stand between you and the mountain winter. Yet, in this fragile barrier, lies a kind of power. Human hands built this shelter, shaped these logs, laid the chinking, tended the fire. Survival here is an act of quiet craftsmanship. You return to the hearth. The perpetual stew pot lets out a slow bubble, filling the air with the earthy scent of beans softening hour by hour. You lift the lid. Steam rises, carrying warmth to your face. The stew hasn't changed much, but in winter, that's part of the comfort consistency, the soft repetition of familiar flavors and tasks. This brings us to today's major historical fact. Frontier families often ate the same food for days at a time during winter. Not out of monotony, but because ingredients were limited and the fireplace doubled as stove, heater, and social center. Food wasn't about variety, it was about fuel and warmth. A good stew was less a recipe and more a daily companion. You gently replace the lid and stir the pot once, watching small ripples spread across its surface like tiny waves. Then you step back, wiping your hands on the quilt almost absent-mindedly. A faint rustling sound draws your attention to the rafters. You look up to see the melody of dried herbs shifting in tiny motions. At first, you think it's just warm air rising from the hearth. But then you notice something tucked along the beam, an old leather pouch tied with a simple knot. Curiosity nudges you. You reach up and lift it down. The pouch is small, worn soft, and smells faintly of sage. You untie the knot carefully and peek inside. Dried seeds, tiny, oval, pale. This leads naturally into tonight's obscure cultural tidbit. Many 1800s mountain settlers kept pouches of heirloom seeds in hidden or protected places, fearful that animals, moisture, or bad luck might destroy their next planting season. Seeds weren't simply supplies, they were family lineage, survival plans, and hope folded into a handful of grains. Some families saved the same seed lines for generations. You close the pouch and tie it shut again, placing it gently back on the beam where you found it. It feels like returning a treasure to its rightful resting place. You sit back down on the stool, feeling the familiar wobble. This piece of furniture has become almost endearing, a slightly unpredictable but loyal companion. You shift your weight just enough to keep it steady. The fire pops. A tiny spark jumps upward, then vanishes into the dark chimney. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the warmth brush across your face. Behind you, the cabin whispers its usual array of small sounds. Logs settling, herbs rustling, wind pressing faintly against the outer wall. Then another sound drifts in soft, low, drawn out. A wolf's howl. Not far, not close. Somewhere in the folds of night, where sound and cold mingle freely. The howl rises, trembles, fades. Another follows lower, deeper. A conversation across the snow. The sound is ancient, older than cabins, older than people, older than smoke. It sends a slight shiver down your spine, not fear. Just the feeling of being a small piece of a vast, wild world. You imagine the wolves pacing the ridges, their paws silent on the snow, their breath visible in spirals. They know the mountain better than any human ever will. Their presence shapes the atmosphere of the night, reminding you that, even in stillness, the wilderness is awake. You sip your warm drink, whatever blend of hot water and lingering herbs it has become, and feel the heat slide into your chest. Historians still debate whether settlers found wolves more frightening or comforting to hear at night. Some wrote with dread, afraid the animals would steal livestock or approach too closely. Others took the sound as reassurance. The wolves howled because they were hunting far away, not lurking nearby. The truth likely shifts somewhere between admiration and caution. You stand again and move toward the door. You don't open it, but you place your palm flat against the thick wood. It's cool, slightly rough, solid. Your small gesture meets the silence outside, where the wolves continue their distant winter chorus. After a moment, you return to the hearth. You adjust the logs, pulling embers closer, preparing the fire for the longer stretch of night ahead. Orange light spills across your hands, your clothes, the fire, quilt draped around you. The cabin feels like its own little universe. Warm, humming, timeless. A world built from logs, flame, patience, and long winter nights. You lower yourself onto the stool, letting your breath slow again. The room glows in soft waves of firelight. The shadows sway gently with each movement of the flames. Outside, the mountains hold their cold vigil. Inside, the cabin wraps you like a quiet, wool-lined cocoon, and you drift deeper into the soft stillness of winter night, the fire crackling softly as though whispering stories older than memory. Night has now fully claimed the mountains, settling over the valley like a thick wool blanket pulled all the way up to the sky's chin. Inside the cabin, the fire is the only source of light, steady, warm, and unmistakably alive. It casts the walls in shades of amber and gold, turning each log into a glowing rib of this wooden, breathing shelter. You stand slowly and stretch your back, feeling the warmth flow down your spine. The quilt slips slightly, and you pull it tighter around your shoulders as you step closer to the fire. The stew pot gives a tiny sleepy bubble, as if murmuring in its own drowsy voice. For a moment, you simply listen. To the fire, to the quiet, to the slow breathing of the cabin. Nothing else intrudes. The mountain night is vast, but the cabin narrows it into something comforting, contained, manageable, warm. You move gently toward the window. The frost has thickened into a delicate lacework that obscures nearly everything outside, but the faintest glimmers of starlight peek through, forming small points of silver against the dark. The stars here feel closer, somehow sharper, colder, and incredibly still. You lift your hand and trace one of the frost patterns. It's intricate, almost delicate enough to look intentional. Nature's artwork formed from nothing but cold breath and moisture. This leads you into today's major historical fact. Many frontier families covered their windows in winter using oiled cloth or heavy fabric, because glass panes were expensive, fragile, and rare in remote mountain regions. A simple tallow-soaked cloth could act as insulation while still allowing some dim light to filter through. A luxury like full glass meant someone had travelled far or spent dearly to obtain it. You run your finger along the window's wooden frame, imagining past winters where frost clung even thicker, where the window might have been just a faint glow behind layers of cloth. You step away from the window and move toward the salve, small wooden chest at the foot of the straw mattress. Its lid creaks as you lift it. Inside are folded items, wool socks patched many times, a small tin with an unidentifiable salve, and a set of hand-carved dominoes worn smooth from use. You pick up a domino piece, turning it over in your fingers. The dots are unevenly carved, but the craftsmanship is charming. Someone made these with care and enough time to get each marking more or less correct. This leads naturally to tonight's obscure cultural tidbit. Many mountain settlers played quiet games during winter nights: dominoes, checkers, whittling contests, or old European card games. These weren't elaborate gatherings. They were small, humble rituals meant to pass time, ease loneliness, or distract from the relentless chill. Some families believed these games kept the mind sharp and the spirit steady. You place the domino back in the chest and close the lid gently. Then softly the cabin creaks, not from settling, not from the wind, but from the outer wall. You turn your head slightly and listen. A faint brushing sound. Something or someone passing near the cabin's exterior. You walk to the door quietly. You don't open it. You simply rest your ear against the wood. At first, nothing. Then faintly. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. Something moving through the snow. You recognize the sound. Careful, deliberate steps. Not the light, skittery movement of a rabbit or fox. Not the deep, heavy sinking of an elk or bear. This is something smaller than a deer but larger than a hare. A coyote, most likely. It pauses near the door. You can almost picture it, ears perked, breath steaming, nose lifted as it investigates the faint scent of warmth drifting from inside. Coyotes, despite their reputation, were common visitors near cabins, drawn by curiosity more than anything else. The footsteps continue, circling toward the woodpile. You hear another crunch, then another, and then silence again. The coyote moves on, slipping back into the endless dark. Historians still debate whether settlers saw these nighttime animal visits as comforting signs of life or as reminders of their own isolation. Some diaries describe animals as neighbors. Others treat them as threats just beyond the circle of firelight. The truth likely depended on the night. You walk back to the fire and lower yourself onto the stool. The stool wobbles obediently, offering stability despite its perpetual doubts about its own structure. The fire glows brighter as you settle in. You poke the embers. They flare in response, tiny bursts of orange light. Another log shifts in the hearth, letting out a pop that sends a faint shower of sparks upward. They vanish quickly into the dark chimney. You breathe deeply, letting the warmth wash over your face. The glow of the fire reflects softly in the stew pot. The quilt rests comfortably on your shoulders, weighted with its many patchwork stories. You lift the tin cup again and pour yourself a small amount of hot water. Steam rises gently, curling upward into the slow dance of firelight. You take a sip, feeling the warmth spread inside you. Your thoughts soften, drifting like snowflakes. The fire's rhythm is hypnotic. The cabin's quiet is deep. You lean your head back slightly, closing your eyes. You can hear the owl again, its call floating through the night like a solitary bell tone. Farther off, a second owl answers. Their voices echo softly between the trees, threading through the darkness. You feel strangely connected to them. Not as a human watching animals, but as another creature sharing the same quiet winter. The cabin creaks once more, but this time it sounds almost like a sigh content, restful, wrapped in the night. You open your eyes slowly. The fire glows. The shadows sway. The kettle hums in a low, steady whisper. You pull the quilt higher, letting it wrap around your chin. Your breath slows naturally. Your muscles unwind. The warmth settles deep. And in the soft glow of the mountain night, the cabin becomes the safest place in the world, just you, the fire, and the patient heartbeat of winter moving quietly outside. The night holds the cabin in a deep, steady stillness. One of those rare moments where everything feels suspended, held gently in place by the cold outside and the warmth inside. The fire glows with a soft confidence, no longer crackling loudly, but settling into a rhythmic pulse of ember and flame. The shadows it casts sway slowly, as if they too are growing drowsy. You rise from the stool, wrapping the quilt more securely around your shoulders, letting its familiar weight anchor you. The air near the window is cooler, and when you step toward it, the temperature shift is immediate. A faint draft creeps in from somewhere in the frame, brushing your ankles like a cold finger reminding you it exists. The frost on the glass has grown thicker again, reforming in new branching patterns, delicate arcs, curling shapes, star-like clusters. You lean close and breathe softly onto the pane, watching the frost melt into a small, circular patch, momentarily giving you a glimpse of the outside world. Darkness, snow, stars, and the faint outline of the ridge. Then, slowly, the frost creeps back over the glass, reclaiming the view as if gently insisting on privacy. You pull away from the window and return to the hearth. The stew pot gives another faint bubble, almost inaudible, but present enough to remind you it's still there, still simmering, still doing its quiet work of softening whatever ingredients remain in it. This brings us gently into today's major historical fact. Frontier families often let stew cook overnight on the embers, allowing them to wake to a warm meal in the morning. Embers generated just enough heat for slow cooking, turning even the toughest ingredients tender. It was one of the few luxuries winter life offered. A warm breakfast waiting without extra effort. You lift the lid and stir the stew slightly. It's thick now, rich despite its simplicity. Small clouds of steam rise, warming your face. You set the lid back on with a soft clink. A low groan of wood echoes from the rafters. This time, it's not the wind, it's the logs adjusting to the temperature drop outside. Wood in these cabins was alive in its own way, constantly shifting, shrinking, expanding. Settlers often joked that their houses had opinions about the weather. You sit again on the stool, letting its familiar wobble greet you like an old friend. The firelight paints the room in warm hues. You sip from your tin cup, savouring the faint herbal taste. The warmth blooms gently in your chest. Then a soft tapping at the window. You turn your head. Not loud, not alarming. Just a light, deliberate tap. You rise slowly, curiosity pulling you toward the sound. As you approach, you can see a small shape, a dark silhouette perched near the window ledge outside. A bird, a small mountain sparrow, puffed up against the cold, perched on a snow-covered branch just inches from the glass. Its head tilts slightly, as if it's studying the glow of your fire with quiet fascination. This leads easily into tonight's obscure cultural tidbit. Some mountain settlers believed that small birds at the window in winter were messengers of calm weather, a sign that no storm was approaching. Others believed the opposite, that birds sought shelter before a change in the wind. Historians still debate whether these interpretations were based on observation or hopeful imagination. The sparrow blinks once, twice. Its tiny breath fogs the air before it. For a moment, you stand perfectly still, observing one another. A shared moment in the winter dark. Then, with a tiny flick of its wings, it hops once on the branch, leaving behind a faint dusting of snow. It tilts its head again and takes off, disappearing into the night as quietly as it arrived. You remain at the window, watching the trail of disturbed snow settle back into place. The night is still again. You return to the hearth. You place another small log onto the fire. It catches slowly, then eagerly, sending a new wave of warm light across the cabin. The flames reflect in the metal pot, shimmering across its curved surface. You take a seat on the edge of the straw mattress. The quilt pools around you, soft and warm. You run your hand across the fabric over the patches of worn blue, faded crimson, pale brown. Each square holds a softness that comes only with age. The mattress rustles beneath you, its straw shifting gently. Frontier families often refilled mattresses with fresh straw each season. Over time, the straw would flatten, gather dust, and occasionally house small critters. A seasonal refill was both practical and necessary. You adjust your seat, listening to the subtle crunch of the straw. It's a humble sound, strangely soothing. The cabin creaks once more, wood clicking, settling, adapting to the deepening cold. Outside, the stars sharpen. You glance toward the window again and see them faintly tiny white dots scattered across the dark sky, crisp and crystalline. Mountain stars always seemed closer, as if leaning in to watch the world. You lie back gently on the mattress, keeping the quilt across your chest. The fire's glow reaches you even across the room, sending soft pulses of orange light over the ceiling. You listen, to the fire, to the faint hum of the kettle, to the cold wind brushing against the logs, to the far-off, trailing call of an owl. The room's silence is not empty, it's rich, layered, full of old stories and long winters. You close your eyes for a moment. Your mind drifts to the people who lived here before. Their hands on the same door latch, their breath fogging the same window, their footsteps on the same earth-packed floor, their winter evenings spent exactly like this, warming by the fire, listening to the night, waiting for spring. Historians still debate whether winter was the harshest season or the most peaceful. Diaries describe both the relentless cold and the rare calm, the long nights and the small rituals that made them bearable. You open your eyes again. The fire crackles gently, the shadows sway, the night deepens. And the cabin, faithful and warm, keeps its steady vigil around you, holding a small circle of light against the vast winter dark. The night deepens further, settling into a colder, quieter phase. A stillness so complete you can almost hear the snow resting outside. The fire, now steady and mature in its glow, sends waves of warmth through the cabin in slow, rhythmic breaths. Every flicker of flame paints a soft dance across the logs, bringing the cabin alive with gentle movement. You rise from the straw mattress, quilt still wrapped around your shoulders, and walk toward the table. The wooden surface feels smooth beneath your fingertips, its familiar contours warmed by the firelight. You trace the grain lines, ridges, curves, little knots, each one shaped by years of winters just like this. On the table, the almanac lies open to a new page. You hadn't noticed it earlier, but perhaps the last gust of wind, or your shifting footsteps, caused it to fall open. The entry reads, in tightly spaced handwriting, "Night long, stars bright, snow firm, wind listening." You pause at that last phrase, wind listening. It feels poetic, almost eerie in its simplicity. You imagine the writer pausing before adding it, glancing toward the door, hearing the faint whispering gusts pressing against the cabin walls. You run your hand across the page gently, as though acknowledging the writer's presence. Then you close the almanac softly and set it aside. You walk toward the door and rest your ear against the wood again. The cold presses through faintly. You hear nothing but stillness, yet the stillness itself feels like a sound. The snow's muffled quiet, the mountain's heavy calm, the absence of wind. This brings you to today's major historical fact. In deep winter, settlers often judged the weather not by sight but by sound or lack of it. Silent nights often meant dropping temperatures and settling snow, while restless winds indicated changes ahead. Some called it listening to the mountain breathe. You step back and return to the hearth. The fire has shifted slightly. One of the logs collapses inward, sending a series of tiny sparks up the chimney. They vanish instantly, but their brief shimmer brightens the cabin for a heartbeat. The kettle hums again, a quiet, low murmur like a sleepy conversation. You pour a small cup of hot water, adding a pinch of dried herbs from a bundle overhead. Mint and sage, their scent mixes into the steam, drifting upward in soft spirals. You cradle the warm cup in your hands and sink into the stool, giving it an encouraging tap on its wobbly leg. It steadies, as if gathering its confidence for the night shift. You sip slowly, letting the warmth seep into your chest. It tastes faintly herbal, faintly smoky, faintly like everything in this cabin. The quiet settles deeper, then another small sound, barely audible. A faint scurrying near the far wall. You glance over. The scratching rhythm is gentle, not frantic, just exploratory. Likely a mouse or vole, investigating the snow-packed edges of the cabin. Its presence is expected, almost inevitable. This leads you into today's obscure cultural tidbit. Mountain settlers, sometimes named the mice who lived in their cabins during winter, not out of fondness, exactly, but as a way of making peace with the uninvited guests. Some journals refer to them as winter neighbors, and families often tolerated their presence so long as the mice didn't eat too much of the stored grains. You listen a moment longer, scritch, pause, scritch, scritch, then silence. The cabin is still again. You set your cup down and rise to stretch your legs. The straw mattress rustles softly behind you. You walk toward the window, drawn once again by the faint silver glow that outlines the frost patterns. You rub a small circle on the glass with your fingertip to clear a view. Outside, the snow gleams under starlight, pure, untouched, and impossibly soft-looking. The sky above is unusually clear now. Stars spangle the darkness in bright clusters, shimmering like cold lanterns hung across the sky. A faint streak crosses the horizon, a falling star. Quick, silent, gone in an instant. You watch the sky for another moment. No more streaks appear, but the stars seem to pulse gently, as if nodding quietly to your presence. You turn away from the window and wander to the small wooden chest again. You lift the lid. The patched socks lie neatly folded, the tin salve rests in the corner, and beside the dominoes sits a small cloth pouch you hadn't noticed before. You pick it up. Inside are several tiny carved wooden pieces, small animals. A bear, a deer, a bird, a rabbit. Their surfaces are smooth from handling, their shapes simple but expressive. Someone spent long winter evenings shaping these figures with care. You turn the little wooden bear in your fingers. The carving is simple, but the posture is unmistakable, head raised slightly, as if sniffing the air. You set the pieces back in the pouch, close it reverently, and return it to the chest. Then you walk back to the fire. Your fingers brush the quilt. Your breath slows. The room glows with a deep warmth. Historians still debate whether winter evenings in these cabins were lonely or comforting. Some accounts describe a heavy quiet that wore on the mind. Others speak of evenings filled with quiet creativity, carving, sewing, telling stories, watching the fire. You feel yourself slipping into that rhythm now, your thoughts softening, your body relaxing, your mind adjusting to the gentle pull of the firelight. You lift the stew lid again and stir slowly. The rich aroma fills the cabin, warm and earthy. It's not a feast, but it's comfort, the kind that settles in your chest like slow-burning embers. You sit once more on the stool, quilt wrapped around your shoulders like a cocoon. The flames sway, crackling softly. The night hums, the mountains rest. You let out a long, quiet breath. The air leaves your lungs like a sigh, woven from warmth and night. The cabin, this sturdy pocket of warmth in the vast winter dark, becomes your entire world, small, familiar, gentle. You close your eyes for a moment. You feel the fire on your skin. You hear the snow's hush pressing soft against the walls. You listen to your own breath blending into the slow rhythm of the cabin, and you feel the simple, profound comfort of being sheltered. The cabin rests in the deepest part of night, now the hour when even the mountains seem to hold their breath. The fire's glow has mellowed into a steady orange pool of warmth, as if the hearth itself is drifting into a half-dream. You rise slowly from the stool, letting the quilt slide over your shoulders, its familiar weight comforting and warm. The air near the window is colder, darker, thicker somehow. You walk toward it, hearing your footsteps sink softly into the packed earth floor. Frost blooms across the glass, like an elaborate map drawn by winter's own hand. You press your fingers gently to the pane and feel the cold pulse back through the glass. Outside, the world is quiet, so quiet it feels like every sound has been gently tucked away under the snow. You turn back to the cabin, letting the firelight guide your steps. The stew pot gives a small burble again, as if trying to say, "Still here, still warm." You lift the lid to let some of the steam escape. The scent drifts up, earthy, gentle, slow. You inhale, letting its warmth linger in your nose. This leads gracefully into tonight's major historical fact. Winter stews in frontier cabins weren't just meals, they were timekeepers. Settlers often judged the passing hours of a winter night by the soft rhythms of simmering food. A stew that had thickened meant the fire had been burning steadily. A stew that cooled meant the embers were fading. In a world before clocks or reliable light, food and fire became the day's gentle markers. You replace the lid and give the pot a slow stir before stepping back. The kettle murmurs approvingly above the flames. A faint tapping comes from the rafters, again not the flutter of a bird this time. but the shifting of dried herbs suspended from their cords. You look up. The bundles sway gently, stirred by a warm updraft from the fire. Their shadows dance on the ceiling in crooked little shapes, familiar but strangely mesmerizing. You sit on the straw mattress for a moment, letting it rustle softly under your weight. The quilt pools around your legs, warm and reassuring. You run your hand along the mattress edge, feeling the rough seams of the old ticking fabric. It's worn in places, but sturdy like everything else here. Something catches your eye, a faint glimmer near the hearth. You move closer and discover a small metal object, partly hidden in the shadows, an old brass button, dulled by time. You pick it up. It's surprisingly heavy, worn smooth along one edge. It must have belonged to someone's coat once, perhaps lost during a hurried moment or a long winter evening of sewing. You turn it over in your fingers. This brings us to tonight's obscure cultural tidbit. Settlers often saved and reused every button from worn-out clothing. Shirts, coats, trousers, nothing was thrown away without salvaging fasteners, hooks, clasps, and buttons. A good brass button could survive multiple garments, passed down like a tiny heirloom. Some families even kept button jars filled with mismatched treasures. You smile softly and set the button on the table beside the almanac. Speaking of which, you reach for the almanac now, flipping to another page. The next entry reads, "Cold burns sharper, tracks fresh. Snow whispering. Snow whispering." You close your eyes for a moment and imagine that sound. The hush of falling flakes, the soft brushing against trees, the faint settling of drifts shifting their weight. You place the almanac back down and move toward the door. Again, you do not open it. You simply rest your palm on the wood. It's cool, solid, quiet. The night presses gently against the door, as if testing its strength. You listen. At first, nothing. Then, softly, a slow, steady crunch of snow. Not hurried, not panicked. A quiet, deliberate sound. You lean closer, your ear touching the door. Another crunch, then two more, spaced evenly apart. A deer, you think, heavy enough to sink into the snow, light enough to move gracefully. You picture it a pale shape drifting across the drifts, steam curling from its nostrils, ears flicking in the moonless dark. Perhaps it's searching for food. Perhaps it's simply wandering. Perhaps it wandered near your cabin out of curiosity, sensing the faint warmth radiating outward. The footsteps pause. You hold your breath. Then another sound. A snort, faint but clear. Then the slow crunching resumes, moving away, fading into the night. You let out a long, soft breath and step back from the door. Historians still debate whether settlers considered deer friendly company, or merely a reminder of hunger and harsh winters. But one thing is certain, their presence at night was always felt, always noticed, always quietly acknowledged. You return to the hearth once more, sitting gently on the stool. You add another small piece of wood. The flames respond instantly, licking upward, brightening the cabin. The room glows brighter now, warm and golden. The shadows pull back slightly, retreating into the corners like shy animals. You wrap the quilt tighter around yourself, pulling it up to your chin. The fabric holds warmth easily, trapping it close, letting it seep slowly into your skin. The kettle hums softly. The fire breathes. The night stays still. Your eyelids grow heavier with each passing moment. The wariness of the cold fades. The comfort of the fire deepens. You stand again and walk toward the wooden chest at the foot of the bed. You lift the lid and take out the small pouch of carved wooden animals. You hold them in your hand, their smooth shapes warming in your grasp. A bear, a deer, a rabbit, a bird. You place them carefully on the table, arranging them in a small line. They look almost like they're standing, watch little guardians of the cabin, carved in quiet winter hours. You sit back down and admire them for a moment. Their simplicity is soothing, their presence gentle. Your breathing slows. The fire flickers, sending orange ripples across the walls. The shadows settle. The mountains outside rest in their frozen quiet. And you, wrapped in warmth and held by the cabin's steady embrace, drift deeper into the stillness of the winter night. The cabin seems to hum with a deeper, slower warmth, as midnight drifts closer. The fire's glow settles into a low, steady pulse, less a blaze now and more a heartbeat, a warm reminder that even in the coldest places, something remains alive. Shadows stretch soft and long across the floor, moving only when the flames shift, as if they too are growing tired. You pull the quilt around your shoulders once more and rise from the stool, letting your feet sink gently into the packed earth. The floor is cool beneath you, but not cold. The fire has kept the worst of winter at bay. Still, you can feel the faint trace of mountain chill clinging to the far corners of the room, like quiet reminders of the world outside. You walk toward the window, feeling the drop in temperature with every step. Frost curls across the glass in looping, feather-like patterns. They shimmer faintly in the firelight. You lean close, trying to see beyond them, but the night is too thick. Darkness presses right against the window, soft and absolute. You breathe gently on the frost. A tiny patch melts, revealing a sliver of the world. Moonlight, thin, pale, almost ghostly, now filters through the clouds above the ridge, spilling a soft glimmer across the snow. You can't see much, but you sense the vastness outside more than you see it. You linger there for a moment, palm against the cold pane. Then you hear it faint, distant, carried over the snow like a whisper. Wind. Not fierce, not angry, but just stirring. A soft, low sweep of air brushing against the mountainside. The kind of wind that makes the world shift slightly, like someone turning in their sleep. This leads seamlessly into today's major historical fact. Mountain settlers often believed they could predict weather changes by listening to the wind's tone. A gentle, low-breathing wind meant stable cold. A sharp, whistling one foretold snow. A hollow, echoing wind suggested rising temperatures and melt. With no barometers or forecasts, their ears were often the only tools they had. You step back from the window, quilt brushing the floor softly behind you. The fire pops once quietly, as if in response to the whisper outside. You take a seat on the edge of the bed. The straw mattress rustles warmly beneath you. You lean back slightly, letting your shoulders relax. The quilt settles comfortably over your legs. The mattress has grown warmer now, absorbing heat from the fire all evening. Something creaks near the rafters. You look up to see one of the herb bundles swaying slightly, though there's no breeze inside. As it moves, a few dried leaves drift downward, floating lazily before settling on the floor. You can't help but smile at the tiny shower of herbs. This brings you into tonight's obscure cultural tidbit. Many settlers believed that herbs falling from their drying bundles during winter nights were good luck signs, especially if they fell near the hearth. Some said it meant blessings for the next season. Others thought it simply meant the cord was wearing thin. Historians still debate which interpretation was more accurate or more superstitious. You bend down, pick up one of the fallen leaves, and study its curled edges before placing it gently on the table beside the almanac. Speaking of the almanac, you open it again, letting the soft crack of its spine slice lightly through the quiet. Tonight's entry is simple. Quiet, stars steady, spirits calm. You linger on that last phrase. Spirits calm. You wonder whether the writer meant actual spirits, or simply the feeling in their heart after a long winter day. Frontier writing often blurred the lines between superstition, emotion, and observation. You close the almanac gently, letting the soft thud settle into the silence. The cabin creaks once more. You listen to the sound wood shifting, adjusting, relaxing. These logs have held up through storms, years, seasons. They carry the memory of every winter they've survived. Your gaze drifts to the row of small wooden animals you arranged earlier. The firelight dances across their carved surfaces, giving them each a tiny glimmer of life. The rabbit catches the most light, its shape glowing softly. You slide it between your fingers, feeling the craftsmanship, the careful cuts, the warmth the wood has absorbed. You imagine the person who carved it sitting by this same fire, perhaps on a night just like this, quiet, cold, contemplative. Maybe the carver had children who played with these little figures on long winter evenings. Maybe the figures were simply a way to pass time when the world outside became unreachable under deep snow. You set the rabbit down again and rise. The kettle hums its steady melody. You pour another cup of warm water, feeling the heat seep into your palms. You add a sprinkle of dried mint from a nearby bundle. The steam swirls upward, catching the firelight in delicate threads. You sip slowly, savoring the fire, warmth, the soft herbal taste, the faint smoky undertone of cabin air. You feel your shoulders soften, your breath lengthen, your heartbeat slow. Then a soft knock, not on the door, not outside, but on the roof. A gentle tock, then another, then silence. You listen, snow sliding. A small patch has loosened and slipped downward, its weight tapping lightly as it fell. The sound is familiar, almost comforting. Cabin roofs always held onto snow until the fire warmed the inside enough to loosen its grip. The snow settles outside with a faint, muffled sigh. You return to the stool and rest your hands near the fire. The flames reflect softly off your skin. Your breath fogs slightly in the cooler air near the floor, then warms and disappears upward. Historians still debate whether winter nights in the mountains felt peaceful or unsettling to settlers. The quiet could be soothing, but it also left room for loneliness to settle in. For some, the silence was a balm. For others, it was too heavy. For you, in this moment, it feels deeply peaceful. Perfectly still, perfectly simple, perfectly safe. The fire sways, the kettle hums, the cabin's heartbeat continues. You let out a long, slow breath and close your eyes. You are warmed, you are sheltered, you are held by this small patch of light in the vast winter night. The night has reached that deep, nearly motionless hour when even the cabin seems to breathe slower. The fire still burns, but now it's a gentler glow, embers shining like tiny suns, flickering just enough to remind you they're alive. The flames have settled low, swaying in small orange waves. Their soft rhythm mirrors the steady inhale and exhale of the winter dark world outside. You ease yourself up from the stool and stretch, feeling the quilt drift behind you like a heavy warming cloak. Your joints make quiet murmurs not from discomfort, but simply because stillness has become the dominant posture of the evening. Everything here, including you, has grown beautifully slow. You stand near the hearth and let the warmth soak into your front while the cold nips lightly at your back. The contrast is almost grounding. It's a familiar sensation for anyone who has lived in such cabins. One side warm as bread, fresh from the oven. The other side, politely reminding you that winter has opinions. You walk toward the door, curious. Not to open it, just to listen. When you place your ear to the timber, you feel the chill through the wood, a whisper of the mountain's cold breath. There is no wind now, no footsteps, no owls calling, just silence. A thick, velvety quiet that feels like snowfall turned into sound. This leads into your major historical fact for the section. Frontier settlers often referred to these silent, windless winter nights as still nights or listening nights. Without wind, sound traveled strangely far. A whisper inside the cabin could be heard outside through cracks in the logs. Settlers often grew, cautious on such nights, afraid their voices might carry where they didn't intend. Yet they also found the stillness comforting, a kind of temporary peace granted by the cold. You step away from the door and return to the hearth. The fire gives a soft pop. A spark drifts upward like a tiny star and disappears. You crouch and adjust the logs, nudging one closer to the embers. The fire responds immediately, crawling up the wood in thin, luminous ribbons. The flame brightens just enough to push the deeper shadows back a few inches. On the table, the small wooden animals glow faintly in the fire's reflection. You walk to them, picking up the little deer and turning it over in your hands. Its tiny legs and carved ears show careful workmanship, slow hours, patient hands. You imagine the person who carved it listening to this same fire, this same quiet, maybe even sitting on this same wobbly stool. You picture them leaning forward, eyes focused, knife in hand, smoothing each curve of the deer's shape while winter pressed against the cabin walls. You set the deer back down gently. The almanac sits where you left it. You open it without thinking, letting its pages fall naturally to the next entry. Tonight's page reads, "Night silent, snow deep. Let the fire rest." The simplicity of the note makes you smile. Let the fire rest. As if the fire were a companion deserving a break after a long day. Frontier writings often personified everyday things: wind, fire, snow, the mountain itself, because solitude breeds conversation with the world around you. You close the almanac softly and return to the stool. It wobbles again, but tonight it feels like the wobble is friendlier, almost comforting in its predictability. You sip from your cup, now holding warm water with faint mint traces. The flavor is subtle, almost ghostly, but soothing in its own quiet way. Then, a faint vibration in the floor, barely noticeable. You stand slowly, surveying the cabin. A soft rustle near the woodpile. Then the sound of something small darting quickly. You move closer. A little mouse darts from beneath the woodpile, pauses, and looks up at you with dark, reflective eyes. For a moment, the two of you simply stare at one another. The mouse twitches its whiskers, then scurries across the cabin, disappearing behind the straw mattress. This offers an easy transition to tonight's obscure cultural tidbit. Settlers sometimes believed mice that appeared in the dead of night were warmth finders, signaling that the fire was burning especially well. Some even interpreted nighttime mouse visits as signs that winter had a few merciful days ahead. Whether accurate or not, the idea clearly brought comfort during long seasons. You chuckle softly under your breath. The mouse is gone now, leaving only a faint rustle in its wake. You return to the hearth and poke the embers gently. The fire responds with a low, contented crackle. From outside, a faint sound emerges. Not a howl, not a footstep, not wind. Something softer, snow settling. You listen closely as a small avalanche of powder shifts down the slope of the roof. It hits the ground outside in a muted whoosh, adding to the snowpack. The cabin seems to sigh at the relief of losing that weight. Historians still debate whether these sounds brought settlers annoyance or reassurance. Some wrote about being startled awake by sudden nighttime snowslides. Others found the sound comforting, a sign the storm's burden was easing. You move toward the window again, wiping away a small patch of frost with your thumb. Through the tiny clearing, you can see moonlight drifting across the snow like a pale scarf. The mountains glow faintly in the distance, their edges soft and rounded beneath the deep winter night. You let your hand rest on the windowsill, feeling the cold seeping through the wood. You turn away and walk back toward the center of the room. The quilt drapes around you. The fire glows steadily. Your breath mixes with the cabin's warmth. You sit again on the edge of the mattress, letting your feet rest on the cool floor. The straw rustles beneath you, familiar and grounding. Your eyes wander around the room. The kettle gleaming faintly, the herbs hanging overhead, the small bowl of dried berries on the shelf, the almanac resting open like a sleeping companion, the wooden animals lined neatly on the table. Each object holds a quiet story. Each one has weathered many winters. Each one has become part of this sanctuary's slow-beating heart. You lie back gently, keeping the quilt pulled up across your chest. The fire's glow dances against the ceiling in slow, sleepy patterns. The warmth reaches you even from across the room. You inhale deeply. Warm air. Herbs. Smoke. The faint scent of simmering stew. Your body grows wonderfully heavy. Your thoughts soften, stretching out like long shadows. The world outside becomes a distant, icy dream. And inside this tiny cabin, you float between wakefulness and rest, safe, warm, wrapped not just in a quilt, but in the deep, hovering calm of a winter night in the mountains. The cabin has entered the kind of deep night stillness that feels almost sacred. The fire glows low and steady, its embers pulsing like a warm heartbeat in the dim. Shadows cling gently to the corners, soft and unthreatening, as though they too are settling down for rest. The air is warm near the hearth, cooler farther away, creating little pockets of temperature that feel like distinct rooms inside the same small shelter. You rise from the straw mattress slowly, quilt wrapped securely around your shoulders. The floor greets your bare feet with a cool firmness, though not unpleasant, just a quiet reminder of where you are. The packed earth grounds you, steady and solid under your weight. You walk toward the hearth, feeling the familiar warmth envelope you as you get closer. The fire responds to your presence with a gentle crackle, as if acknowledging you've returned from a moment's drifting. You kneel beside the embers and adjust a half-burned log, nudging it inward. Sparks dance briefly, tiny bright flecks that vanish almost immediately as they drift upward. The flames stretch a little taller for a moment, warming your hands. This eases naturally into today's major historical fact. Many cabins had only one iron cooking pot, one kettle, and one fire tool, often a simple poker made by a local blacksmith or forged at home. These tools were used constantly through winter, sometimes handed down through generations. A well-made poker could last decades, becoming as familiar as a family heirloom. Frontier life led to deep attachments with simple objects. You hold the poker for a moment, noticing its worn smoothness. Countless hands must have gripped this same handle, nudging logs through countless winter nights. You set it aside and stand slowly, letting the quilt fall back around your shoulders like the cascade of fabric. As you move toward the window, your breath makes a faint cloud in front of you, just visible in the cooler air away from the hearth. Frost clings thickly across the pane. You brush a small patch with your thumb and peer out. The world is a deep ocean of snow, glowing faintly under a thin sliver of moon. The mountains stand still, silent, timeless. Then you see it, something faint, something pale, moving gently at the edge of your view. A shape crossing the snow. Not a large animal, not a predator. Small, delicate. A snowshoe hare, its fur almost glowing under the moonlight. It hops lightly across the drifts, pausing now and then to listen, then moving again with surprising grace for such deep snow. You watch it for several heartbeats, the cold glass pressing against your fingertips. The hare pauses one last time near a cluster of buried branches, sniffing the air. Then, with a quick flick of its ears, it darts away into the dark. This offers tonight's obscure, cultural tidbit. Many settlers believed that seeing a hare during deep winter was a good omen, a sign that the cold would soon break, or that the weather would turn gentler. Others believed hares carried messages from the forest, or were simply too clever for their own good. Historians still debate whether these beliefs were born of folklore or pure boredom during long winters. You step away from the window, letting the frost reclaim the tiny melted patch. The almanac lies open on the table, waiting patiently. You sit on the stool and flip to the next entry. The handwriting, though old and faded, is neat and steady. Night long. Hare near door. Good sign. You smile softly, confirmation that someone else, long ago, also found comfort in the presence of a small winter creature. You touch the page gently before closing the almanac. Its spine creaks softly. Its scent, dry paper mixed with centuries of smoke, lingers on your fingertips. You return to the hearth and sit again, letting the stool wobble into its usual, predictable balance. You wrap the quilt tighter around your shoulders, tucking your hands underneath for warmth. The stew pot murmurs a deep, slow bubble that breaks the surface and disappears. You lift the lid a little and breathe in the thick aroma. It smells richer now, fuller, like time has given it depth. You stir it gently with the carved spoon, watching the steam curl upward. You lower yourself slowly onto the mattress again, keeping the quilt across your chest. The straw shifts beneath you, forming little pockets of warmth. You lie there a moment, listening to the night. Then a faint sound, distant, steady, rhythmic. At first you think it might be the wind finally rising again. But no, the wind has its own voice, and this is something else. Hoofbeats, very faint, muffled by snow. Your pulse stays calm, but your attention sharpens. You sit up slightly and tilt your head toward the door. The sound continues soft, padding, uneven, not hurried, not heavy, just present. A deer again, perhaps, or maybe an elk calf wandering near the cabin's edge. You listen as the steps grow slightly louder, then pause. You wait, breath suspended. Then they fade, wandering off into the deeper dark. Historians still debate whether animals approached cabins out of curiosity or because the faint warmth radiating through the logs felt comforting. Some settlers describe nighttime visitors as checking on us, almost as if the forest creatures and humans shared an unspoken winter agreement. Stay warm, move quietly, do no harm. You lie back on the mattress slowly. The fire glows in your peripheral vision, hypnotic. The shadows sway gently. Your breathing steadies. The room feels impossibly calm, a cocoon of heat and stillness in the heart of endless winter. You pull the quilt closer, feeling the soft patches warm against your cheek. Each faded scrap of fabric carries its own quiet story. You wonder who stitched it, how many winters it survived, whose hands placed each square. Your gaze drifts across the room, lingering on the small wooden animals lying neatly on the table. Their shapes glow faintly, like tiny guardians watching over the cabin. A soft drip from the window reaches your ears, a melting icicle dropping into the snow outside, a tiny note in winter's long, quiet song. You close your eyes. The fire hums. The cabin breathes. The mountains hold their ancient silence. And you settle deeper into warmth, letting the night cradle you gently. The cabin rests in a pocket of warmth, while the mountains lie frozen under the deep hush of night. The embers in the hearth glow low and rich, casting long threads of faint light across the room. The fire has settled into its late-night rhythm. Quiet, steady, but always alive. It breathes warmth into the air with each soft crackle, enough to keep the cold at bay, but not bold enough to flare. You rise slowly from the straw mattress, quilt draped over your shoulders like a personal winter cloak. The air beyond the quilt's edge is cooler, brushing lightly against your face and feet. The contrast feels almost pleasant. A gentle reminder that you're still safe inside the narrow circle of the fire's warmth. You approach the hearth first, not out of necessity, but out of instinct. The fire has become the center of everything, the anchor for each moment in this winter night. You gently shift the logs, nudging a smoldering one closer to the heart of the embers. The flames respond with a small flare, enough to warm your hands and paint your face in amber. While tending the fire, you recall today's major historical fact. Settlers often kept a night log, a single, dense piece of wood, specially chosen to burn slowly through the darkest hours. Sometimes these logs were soaked in water beforehand to extend their burn time. Other times, families saved chunks of old hardwood or resin-rich pine specifically for this purpose. The night log was a little insurance policy against freezing while everyone slept. You look at the log now resting in the hearth, its dark form glowing faintly underneath the flames. Perhaps it once served the same purpose for the family who lived here. You step back and let the heat wash over you. Then a faint sound catches your ear, a soft, rhythmic tap, tap, tap from somewhere near the rafters. You look up. Not a bird this time. Not a mouse. Just the creaking of drying herbs shifting slightly as warm air rises. The movement sends down a small sprinkle of crushed leaves, drifting gently before settling near your feet. The scent that follows sharp mint and faint sage blends seamlessly into the air. This leads naturally into tonight's obscure cultural tidbit. Frontier families believed that certain herbs, when stirred by warm air at night, woke up to renew their protective properties. Sage for cleansing, mint for clarity, yarrow for health. Whether this was superstition or simple comfort, historians still debate, but the presence of these herbs in nearly every cabin suggests the belief was strong. You kneel and pick up a piece of dried mint, crumbling it gently between your fingers. Its scent is faint but refreshing. You walk toward the window, quilt trailing softly behind you. Frost claims the entire pane now, its filigree patterns layered thickly like icy lace. You rub a small section clear and peer out into the winter-dark world. Moonlight lies across the snow in pale ribbons, illuminating the drifts like softly sculpted hills. The trees stand tall, their branches heavy with layers of white that sparkle under the thin lunar glow. The night feels enormous, vast and untouched, yet softened by the stillness that settles over everything. And then you see it. A set of fresh tracks winding near the edge of the clearing. Not deep enough for deer, not small enough for rabbit, not heavy enough for elk. Coyote. You watch the path curve toward the woodpile, and then disappear into the tree line. Maybe the same coyote you heard earlier. Maybe not. Either way, the tracks are fresh, likely made only moments before. You find yourself lingering at the window for another long moment. The cold seeps through the glass, numbing your fingertips. You pull the quilt closer and step away. The almanac waits on the table once again, and you sit down on the stool, careful to balance its familiar wobble. You open the book. Tonight's entry reads, Coyote near wood. No storm. Quiet holds. The handwriting feels almost like a reassurance left behind for anyone who might need it. You let your thumb follow the letters slowly, then close the almanac with care. You stand again and wander toward the small wooden chest. Its lid creaks lightly as you lift it. Inside, the carved animals rest where you left them. You choose the wooden bird this time, its wings slightly spread, as if caught in mid-flight. You hold it gently, feeling its weight in your palm. You imagine the hands that carved it steady, practiced, perhaps searching for something to focus on during the darker winter nights. Maybe the carver was teaching a child how to whittle. Maybe they carved alone, using the gentle scrape of the knife to keep their thoughts from sinking into the long winter quiet. You return the bird to the table and arrange it with the others. Then, something new. A faint tremor in the floor. Not strong, not alarming, just a soft vibration. You stand still, listening closely. Another small vibration follows, then stops. Maybe the shifting of the cabin's foundation under snowpack. Maybe the movement of ice outside. Maybe something else. Historians still debate whether cabins made these subtle nighttime sounds because of natural settling or because the surrounding snow compressed unevenly in the cold. Settlers often described them as the house stretching its bones. You nod slightly, as though acknowledging the cabin's nighttime stretch. The kettle hums again on the hearth, its calming sound filling the room like a steady lullaby. You pour a bit of hot water into your cup, letting the steam warm your face. The heat seeps into your hands, spreading slowly, gently, deliberately. The fire pulses quietly, the shadows sway. The cabin holds you in a cocoon of warm wood and quiet stories. You walk toward the straw mattress and lower yourself onto it, bringing the quilt with you. The straw shifts beneath you, forming a comfortable cradle that molds to your body. You breathe in deeply. The faint scent of dried grass carries a familiar peace. You lie back and watch the ceiling glow softly from the fire. The light reflects from the herbs. The wooden rafters cast long lines across the roof. Everything seems to slow even further. Your thoughts drift like falling snow, soft, unhurried, gentle. The mountains outside hold their frozen vigil. The animals move quietly through the night. The cabin breathes its slow, steady breath. And, wrapped in warmth, wrapped in silence, wrapped in the patience of winter, you let yourself ease deeper into rest. The fire has burned low again, humming quietly as it settles into the deep night. Embers glow beneath the half-charred logs like rubies resting in a dim cave, pulsing with a soft, steady light. The air in the cabin feels warmer than you expected, proof of how well the insulated walls, worn though they are, keep the cold at bay. The quilt wrapped around your shoulders adds its own enveloping warmth, creating a cocoon where time seems to stretch out softly. You rise from the mattress slowly, letting your feet find the coolness of the packed earth. The contrast is refreshing, grounding. Your breath curls in faint white threads in the areas far from the fire. But the chill is gentle, not biting. More like a reminder that the world outside is vast and frozen. Even if your little circle of light and comfort remains intact, you move toward the hearth, kneeling beside it. The embers crackle softly as you adjust a settling log. The sparks they release are small but bright, fleeting little stars that vanish long before reaching the chimney's throat. The fire responds with a brief flare, licking up the side of the log before settling again. As the flames grow steadier, you recall today's major historical fact. Many mountain families practiced banking the fire before sleep, pushing hot coals to the back of the hearth and covering them with ashes to keep the embers alive through the night. This simple technique ensured that the fire would be easy to revive in the morning, saving precious matches and avoiding the frustration of coaxing flame from cold kindling in freezing air. Fire wasn't just warmth, it was survival. You decide to bank the fire as they would have. Using the poker, you gently shift the embers into a heap, then add a thin layer of ash from the corner of the hearth. The glow dims slightly but remains warm and alive beneath the cover. The room feels calmer instantly, as if the fire itself has wrapped up for the night. You stand and stretch, letting the quilt drape gracefully over your arms. Movement stirs the air, sending soft ripples through the cabin's warm pockets. You cross the room to the window, stepping into the cooler shadows. Frost coats the glass in swirling shapes, thicker than earlier, curling into crystalline ferns that twist like living things. You brush a patch of frost aside with your knuckle and peer out. Moonlight sits low over the valley now, casting silver streaks across the snow. The entire landscape glows softly, as if lit from beneath by hidden lanterns. The trees stand motionless in their white coats, branches sagging gently beneath the weight. Then you notice something, a faint shimmer near the edge of the clearing. Snowflakes gently falling. not stirred by wind, not drifting sideways, just floating downward like tiny, glowing feathers. The storm is returning, but only lightly, softly. This leads into tonight's obscure cultural tidbit. Settlers believed that the first snowflakes of a returning storm, especially gentle, drifting ones, were a signal of rest from the mountains, a reminder that the worst had passed, and what remained was simply winter doing its slow, rhythmic work. Families often stepped outside to feel those first flakes land on their skin, believing it brought clarity or good fortune. You stay by the window a moment longer, letting the quiet beauty settle over you. Then you turn, your quilt brushing softly against your legs as you move back toward the center of the room. The almanac lies on the table, as constant as the fire. You open it to the next entry. Light snow returning. All calm. Wood enough for tomorrow. You smile. That last line, wood enough for tomorrow, feels almost triumphant in a winter like this. It hints that the cabin's original occupants knew these long hours intimately, counting their firewood the way you now count heartbeats in the quiet. You place the almanac down gently and sit on the stool again. Its wobble is familiar now, almost reassuring. You wrap the quilt closer, pulling its patched edges up to your chin. You listen to the fire's faint breath, to the soft rattle of herbs overhead, to the nearly soundless drift of snow outside. A world wrapped in stillness, and then a soft brushing sound at the door. Not a knock, not an animal scratching, more like snow shifting against the wood. You stand slowly, move to the door, and place your palm flat against it. Cold radiates through your skin. You listen closely. Nothing now. Just a gentle settling sound, the tiny sigh of snow sliding down from the roof and brushing the door as it falls. It's a peaceful sound, a tender one. The cabin frets less under the weight above. Historians still debate whether settlers felt protected or trapped during deep winter nights. Was the cabin a shelter or a cage? The answer seems to shift depending on who wrote the account and how long the winter had lasted so far. But tonight, here, it feels like protection. Pure, uncomplicated shelter. You return to the mattress and lower yourself down. The straw shifts beneath you with its familiar whisper of dry softness. You pull the quilt up and settle your back into the support of the wall. Your eyes drift again to the row of carved wooden animals. They seem almost animated in the firelight, shadows dancing behind them, little reflections glowing on their surfaces. The deer's antlers catch the light just so, while the bird's wings cast a faint silhouette on the wall. You imagine the family who once owned them, children laughing near the fire, a parent carving pieces on long winter nights, stories told in low voices as snow pressed against the walls outside. It's easy to feel their presence, not physically, but as an echo, a warm imprint that lingers in the cabin's memory. You close your eyes, letting the soft symphony of winter quiet fill the air. A drifting snowflake taps the window. The hearth breathes low. The quilt hugs you, gently. Every sound is soft, every movement easy, every breath slow. In this warm, self-contained world, you feel sleep tugging gently at the edges of your thoughts, inviting you deeper into the night's embrace. But not yet, not fully, not until the story reaches its quiet conclusion. You settle more comfortably, allowing your mind to rest. The cabin continues its gentle vigil. The snow falls softly, the mountains watch in silence, and you rest in the warm, glowing heart of a winter that has lasted over a century. The cabin feels even warmer now. Not because the fire has grown, if anything, the hearth has quieted into a deeper, the slower glow, but because the night outside has settled into a calm so complete, it feels almost like a held breath. The world is draped in a softness that only fresh snowfall can bring. Even the air inside seems to move gently, as though respecting the silence around it. You draw the quilt closer, letting its weight settle comfortably along your shoulders. You stand from the mattress and walk toward the hearth, guided by the muted amber light flickering across the floor. The fire is low, just a few flames curling lazily around the night log you banked earlier, but the embers beneath shine with steady strength. You kneel, feeling the warmth touch your face. The scent of wood smoke, slightly sweet, slightly sharp, wraps around you. You adjust a few glowing coals with the poker, careful not to disturb the banked ashes too much. The flames respond with a small, appreciative hiss. It's like adjusting the pulse of the cabin itself. Which brings you to tonight's major historical fact. Many settlers treated the hearth as the heart of their home, both literally and symbolically. Fire was warmth, food, protection, and companionship. Cold hearthstones meant danger, glowing ones meant survival. Some even left offerings, small berries, bits of bread, or herbs to thank the hearth for its service. It was superstition and practicality, two woven together. You rest the poker gently against the stones and rise. A faint shiver of cold whispers from the far side of the room, just a reminder that the fire's warmth doesn't reach every corner. You move toward the window. Frost has reclaimed it entirely again, covering the pane in thick tendrils of icy lace. You clear a tiny circle with your knuckle and peer out. Snow falls softly, almost imperceptibly, drifting down in delicate streams. Each flake glimmers faintly in the moonlight before dissolving into the white sea below. The mountains barely show, just a series of faint silhouettes under the low sky. You watch a moment longer, entranced by the quiet beauty, then step back. On the table, the almanac waits faithfully. You sit on the stool, its wobble familiar, predictable, and flip to the next page. The ink here is slightly smudged, perhaps from wet fingertips long ago. Still, the writing is legible. Snow gentle, quiet, deep, cabin safe. You run your finger over the words safe, feeling a little of that reassurance settle into you. You place the almanac down and rise again. Something catches your eye. A faint shifting shadow near the far wall. You tilt your head, looking closer. Another small movement, then a soft scurry. You kneel, quilt pooling around you, and peer beneath the wooden cupboard. Their two tiny eyes shine back at you for the briefest instant before blinking. A mouse. It freezes for a heartbeat, whiskers twitching rapidly, then retreats gently into the shadows. This leads smoothly into tonight's obscure cultural tidbit. Some settlers believed that mice seen late at night were good weather messengers, especially if they appeared calm rather than frantic. Others interpreted nighttime visits as reminders to repair weak spots in the cabin's walls or food storage. Historians still debate whether these interpretations had any reliability, but the presence of mice was undeniably a common winter occurrence. You stand again, brushing a little dust from your knees. For a moment, the cabin feels more alive, its tiny inhabitants shifting quietly in their hidden spaces. You approach the wooden chest once more. Its lid creaks the same way it always does, a soft groan of old hinges. Inside, the carved animals rest where you last arranged them. You pick up the little bear this time, its rounded shape warm from the nearby firelight. You turn it in your hand, feeling the smooth contours. You imagine how many winter nights went into carving these. The careful, patient cuts. The slow whittling of the grain. The way the carver must have paused to warm their fingers by this same hearth. Maybe humming softly, or listening for sounds outside. You place the bear back down and close the chest gently. Then a soft sound at the door. Not loud, not sharp, just a faint brushing, like snow shifting against the wood. You move toward the door and rest your hand flat on it. The cold presses through the wood, immediately quiet, but insistent. You listen. At first, nothing. Then the gentle sigh of snow settling from the roof. Then silence. No visitors, just winter adjusting its weight. You let your hand linger on the door a moment longer, sharing your warmth with it, then step away. You return to the hearth. The room glows beautifully now, warm shadows rising and falling, herbs swaying faintly, the stew pot reflecting soft amber ripples. Speaking of the pot, you lift the lid slightly and give the stew a slow stir. It's thick and rich, practically melting into itself after so many hours of simmering. The aroma is deep and comforting, the kind that suggests the food has become part of the cabin's air. You set the lid down gently and lower yourself onto the stool once more. You sip from your cup warm water with the last whisper of mint. Your breath releases in slow, relaxed clouds. Your muscles loosen. Your mind drifts. The cabin's atmosphere changes subtly, almost imperceptibly. A kind of hush within a hush. As if the night has reached its quietest point the moment before dawn begins its slow return. You look around the room. The herbs sway in tiny breaths of warm air. The wooden animals stand watch in the soft glow. The almanac rests like an old companion by your elbow. The straw mattress waits, welcoming and warm. and the fire, steady, calm, unhurried, breathes its warm light across everything. Your eyelids feel heavy now, warmth pooling behind them. Historians still debate whether settlers found these final hours of night restful or restless, whether they lay awake listening to the quiet or drifted into sleep easily after long days of work. But in this cabin, in this moment, with snow falling gently outside and warmth pooling inside, rest feels like the most natural thing in the world. You settle back onto the mattress and let the quilt embrace you fully. The straw shifts softly beneath you. The fire hums its low lullaby. The snowfall maintains its gentle whisper just beyond the window. And the mountains, still and ancient, watch over everything. The cabin rests in its warmest, quietest moment yet. The fire has settled into a gentle, glowing bed of embers, steady and dependable, like the slow heartbeat of the night itself. The air feels soft now, layered with warmth from the hearth, the faint herbal scent drifting down from the rafters, and the sweet traces of long-simmered stew. It's the kind of air that makes your shoulders relax without you noticing, the kind of calm that settles deep into your bones. You rise from the mattress, quilt wrapped snugly around you, and walk toward the hearth. The embers glow brighter as you approach, reflecting softly in your eyes. You kneel and use the poker to shift the coals, watching tiny sparks float upward for a second before fading into the chimney. The warmth brushes your face in gentle waves. This brings you to tonight's final major historical fact. Settlers often rose before dawn to wake the fire from its banked state, pulling glowing coals forward and adding thin kindling to coax the flame back to life. Fire revival was a skill, a daily ritual that could mean the difference between a warm morning and a dangerously cold one. Knowing the fire, understanding its moods, was as natural to frontier life as breathing. You stand slowly, feeling the weight of the quilt like a calm hand on your shoulders. The stew pot lets out one last sleepy bubble. You lift the lid, stirring gently. The aroma is deeper now, rich and comforting, the smell of time and patience blending into food. Then your attention pulls toward the window. You walk to it, clearing a small circle of frost with your fingertip. The world outside is changing. The faintest hint of early light, just the spark of it, rests along the ridge. Not sunrise yet, but the soft, silver promise of it. The snow catches that pale glow like it's waking up too, preparing for the shift from night to morning. Breathe on the glass, and the melted patch widens slightly. And that's when you see them. Fresh tracks leading near the woodpile. Small, light. Rabbit, or maybe fox. You squint, tracing the delicate path as it loops once around the side of the cabin and then disappears into a line of trees. This leads perfectly into tonight's obscure cultural tidbit. Settlers believed the first animal tracks before sunrise were omens of the day ahead. Fox tracks meant caution. Rabbit tracks meant swiftness. Deer tracks meant abundance. Whether anyone actually believed this or simply enjoyed a bit of morning whimsy, historians still debate, but the tradition appeared in enough journals to suggest it offered small comfort on long winter mornings. You place your palm against the cold window, feeling the thin separation between warmth and winter. You turn back toward the room. The herbs sway faintly overhead, stirred by a warm draft. The almanac rests open where you left it. The wooden animals sit, lined neatly in soft firelight. You sit on the stool again, its little wobble greeting you like a familiar friend. You open the almanac to the final entry on the page. Dawn near. Quiet night. Fire held. All well. You run your thumb gently over the words. The ink is faded, but the sentiment feels timeless. You close the almanac and set it down. The cabin creaks softly just once, as though acknowledging the approaching dawn. The sound blends into the crackling ember glow, the faint rustling straw, the soft drift of snow outside. You return to the mattress, lowering yourself slowly, wrapping the quilt around you like a final evening embrace. As you settle, your gaze drifts to the wooden animals once more. They stand quietly, each holding a tiny sliver of the cabin's story. You feel the warmth of the fire from across the room, the hush of snow brushing gently against the log walls, the slow, steady rhythm of the world preparing to welcome the day. And for a moment, you simply breathe. Deep, slow, easy. You've made it through the winter night in this little mountain cabin, through the storms, the silence, the shifting shadows, the gentle rituals, the sounds of distant creatures, the glow of embers, and the calm heartbeat of wood and fire. You're warm. You're safe. You're part of the story now, woven quietly into the cabin's long memory. You lie back on the straw mattress, quilt settled warmly around your shoulders, feeling your breath fall into the slow, easy rhythm of the cabin. The fire is just a soft glow now, pulsing, gentle, a heartbeat drifting into rest. The room is dim, wrapped in the warm hush of emberlight. Everything feels slower, softer, quieter. The last traces of night cling to the sky outside, but the first hint of dawn waits patiently on the horizon, a faint silver line, barely formed, like the whisper of a new day. Snow continues to fall in soft, drifting curtains. Each flake lands without sound, adding to the smooth, unbroken, the blanket that covers the mountains in perfect stillness. You feel the softness of the quilt. You feel the warmth lingering in the air. You feel the gentle heaviness settling across your body. Nothing demands your attention now. Nothing pulls at your thoughts. Everything simply slows. The herbs sway faintly above you, their shadows drifting across the ceiling like the slow movement of clouds. The scent they release, lavender, mint, sage, mixes with the last notes of wood smoke, creating a warm, soothing air that fills your lungs with ease. Outside, the mountains rest. Inside, the cabin holds you in quiet, careful warmth. You let your breath deepen, not by effort but by instinct. You let your shoulders drop. You let the weight of the night melt from your body like snow softening in the sun. The fire glows its last sleepy embers. The straw beneath you sighs softly. The world grows warm, slow, distant. And as the dawn gently approaches, you drift wrapped in the safety of the cabin, the hush of winter, and the quiet comfort of knowing the cold can't reach you here. You can rest. You can settle. You can let go now. The night has kept you warm. The cabin has held you close. And you can finally drift into sleep.